When 12-year-old Hazel Carter refused to let the Montana orphan auction separate her family, she never imagined a silent rancher with shadowed eyes would be the one to keep them whole, or that a town's hatred would nearly destroy the only home they'd ever known. If you're ready to witness a story about 5 unwanted children, one stubborn rancher, and a fight for family that shook an entire valley, stay with me until the very end. And when you do, hit that like button and comment your city below. I want to see just how far this story travels across the world. The autumn wind cut across the makeshift platform like a blade, carrying the smell of horses, dust, and desperation. Hazel Carter stood at the front of the wooden stage, her shoulders squared despite the trembling in her knees, 4 smaller bodies pressed against her back like birds sheltering from a storm. She was 12 years old, thin as a fence post, with brown hair that hadn't seen a proper brush in weeks, and eyes that had learned too young how to assess threats. Below the platform, faces blurred together, ranchers in worn hats, townswomen in modest dresses, a few merchants looking for cheap labor. The auctioneer, a portly man named Wickham, with a voice like gravel in a tin can, cleared his throat and consulted his ledger. "Lot 17, he announced, his tone flat with routine. "The Carter children, 5 in total. Girl, age 12. Boy, age 10. Girl, age 8. Boy, age 6. Girl, age 4. Hazel felt Eli stiffen behind her left shoulder. Her brother was all sharp edges and suspicion, his jaw clenched so tight she could hear his teeth grinding. On her right, 8-year-old June pressed her face into Hazel's sleeve, her small fingers twisted in the fabric of Hazel's only dress. Behind them, 6-year-old Noah stood silent, as always, his thumb not quite in his mouth but hovering near it, a ghost of the comfort he'd been shamed out of seeking. And clinging to Hazel's skirt with both hands, 4-year-old Lily hummed tunelessly, the only one of them still young enough to not fully understand what was happening. "Now, we'll start the bidding for the older girl," Wickham continued, pointing his pencil at Hazel. "Strong-looking, capable age, good for household work, or—" "No." Hazel's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through Wickham's pitch like scissors through thread. The auctioneer paused, his jowls quivering slightly. "Excuse me?" "We stay together." Hazel lifted her chin, meeting the eyes of the crowd even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "All 5 of us. Or none of us." A ripple of reaction moved through the assembled buyers. Some amusement, some annoyance, most indifference. A woman in a blue bonnet whispered something to her husband, who shook his head and turned away. 2 ranchers near the back exchanged glances and left without another word. Wickham's face reddened. "Girl, you don't make the terms here. These good people are offering you homes, and you'd best—" "We're not cattle." Eli's voice cracked on the last word, betraying the fear beneath his anger. "And we're not splitting up." Wickham's expression hardened into something cold and administrative. "Then you'll all go back to the county home until someone decides otherwise. And I can tell you right now, 5 mouths is 4 too many for most folks looking to take in charity cases." Hazel felt June's grip tighten, felt Noah's shallow breathing against her back, heard Lily's humming falter into silence. The county home was a place of thin soup, thinner blankets, and men who smiled too much when the matrons weren't watching. They'd been there for 3 months after their mother died of fever, and their father disappeared into a bottle that became more important than his children. 3 months of slowly understanding that the world saw them as a burden to be managed, not children to be loved. "We stay together," Hazel repeated, softer this time, but no less firm. "That's not changing." The crowd was already dispersing. A few lingered out of curiosity, but most had moved on to the next lot. A single boy, 14, with broad shoulders and a dull, defeated expression. Hazel watched potential families turn their backs, watched doors close before they'd even been offered. Her throat tightened, but she refused to cry. Crying was for later, in the dark, where her siblings couldn't see. Then the crowd parted. He didn't push through. People simply moved aside as if the space around him carried weight. He was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with shoulders that spoke of hard work and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to arrange itself into anything resembling warmth. His hair was dark, touched with early gray at the temples, and his eyes were the color of winter sky, pale blue and distant. He wore work clothes, clean but worn, and moved with the quiet economy of someone who'd learned that wasted motion was wasted energy. He stopped at the base of the platform and looked up at them, his gaze moving from Hazel to Eli to June to Noah to Lily, assessing but not cruel. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough, like he didn't use it often. All 5? Wickham recovered his professional demeanor, sensing possible business. Yes, sir, Mr. Drayton, though I should mention taking on 5 children is quite an undertaking. Perhaps if you're interested in help around your ranch, the older 2 would be more practical. I asked if it was all 5. Cole Drayton's eyes didn't leave the children. Not looking for a negotiation. Wickham cleared his throat. Well, yes, the terms of the county's orphan placement program allow for... How much? The auctioneer blinked. I beg your pardon? How much to take all 5? Right now. A different kind of silence fell over the remaining crowd. Wickham shuffled his papers, his fingers leaving sweat marks on the cheap ledger paper. Mr. Drayton, the county asks for a settlement fee to cover administrative costs and to ensure proper placement. For 5 children, we're looking at, let's say, $25 per child, so $125 total, plus... Cole reached into his coat and pulled out a leather fold, extracting bills without counting them. He placed them in Wickham's pudgy hand. There's 200. That cover it? Wickham's eyes widened. Mr. Drayton, that's more than... I know what it is. Do we have an agreement or not? The auctioneer's fingers closed around the money with surprising speed. Yes, of course. I'll just need you to sign the placement papers, and the children will be released into your custody immediately. Hazel watched this exchange with the wariness of someone who'd learned that adult transactions rarely ended well for children. She studied Cole Drayton's profile, trying to read intention in the set of his jaw, the way he stood, the fact that his hands were scarred from work but his nails were clean. When he glanced back up at the platform, she met his eyes and asked the question that mattered. Why? Cole held her gaze for a long moment. Because you asked to stay together. Figured that was worth something. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even particularly warm. But it was honest, and Hazel had learned to value honesty over prettily wrapped lies. Come on down, Cole said, stepping back from the platform. We've got a ride ahead of us. The wagon was sturdy, built for hauling supplies rather than passengers. But Cole had laid out several blankets in the bed and instructed the children to settle in. Lily fell asleep almost immediately, curled against June's side. Noah sat perfectly still, his eyes tracking every movement Cole made with the hypervigilance of someone expecting violence. Eli positioned himself at the tailgate, arms crossed, radiating distrust. Hazel sat near the front, close enough to hear if Cole spoke, but far enough to feel like she could keep watch over her siblings. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Montana landscape, turning the prairie grass to copper and gold. The ranch country spread out in rolling hills punctuated by stands of pine and cottonwood that followed the curves of distant creeks. After an hour of silence, broken only by the wagon's creaking and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats, Cole spoke without turning around. Ranch is another 2 hours north. We'll stop at the creek crossing to water the horses and stretch legs. Hazel acknowledged this with a small noise. Eli said nothing. Place is called the Broken Pine Ranch, Cole continued, his voice carrying back over his shoulder. About 800 acres. We run cattle, some horses. There's a housekeeper, May Lynn. She's particular about muddy boots and washing hands before meals. We know how to be clean, Eli snapped. Didn't say you didn't. Cole's tone didn't change, didn't rise to meet Eli's hostility. Just telling you what to expect. June stirred, lifting her head from where she'd been resting it on her knees. Is it far from town? Town's about 15 miles. Close enough to get supplies when we need them. Far enough that folks mostly mind their own business. Hazel heard what he didn't say. Far enough that 5 new children wouldn't immediately become the subject of gossip and speculation. Or maybe she was reading too much into it, assigning kindness where there was only practicality. The creek crossing was shallow this time of year, the water running clear over smooth stones. Cole pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, moving to unhitch the horses with practiced efficiency. Hazel helped her siblings down from the wagon bed, keeping Lily's hand in hers as the little girl stumbled on sleep-clumsy legs. "There's a flat rock over there," Cole said, gesturing downstream. "Good place to sit. Water's safe to drink if you're thirsty. Just don't wander past the bend. Current gets stronger there." Eli opened his mouth, probably to say something sharp about not needing instructions, but Hazel caught his eye and shook her head minutely. He subsided, scowling. They settled on the rock while Cole tended to the horses, giving them water and checking their hooves with patient thoroughness. Noah watched him with that same unwavering attention, his small body tense as a drawn bowstring. June picked at the hem of her dress, her fingers finding the loose threads and worrying at them. Lily discovered a smooth pebble and began an elaborate game that seemed to involve sorting smaller rocks by size. "What do you think he wants?" Eli asked quietly, his eyes still on Cole's back. "Don't know yet," Hazel admitted. "Nobody takes 5 kids out of kindness." Eli's voice was bitter with experience. "The Johnsons wanted me for field work and you for cooking and cleaning. Mr. Pemberton wanted—" He stopped, his jaw working. They all knew what Mr. Pemberton had wanted, why Hazel had grabbed the nearest heavy object, and why they'd run before the sheriff could be called. "Maybe he's different," June offered, but without much conviction. "Nobody's different." Eli picked up a stone and threw it into the creek with more force than necessary. "They all want something." Noah, who never spoke, made a small sound in the back of his throat. Hazel looked down to find her youngest brother's eyes fixed on her face, wide and pleading. She pulled him close, feeling how thin he was, how his ribs showed through his shirt. "We'll be careful," she promised him, promised all of them. "Like always. We watch, we learn the rules, and we keep each other safe." "And if it's bad," Eli challenged, "then we run. Like always." Hazel said it calmly, but her stomach knotted at the thought. They were getting tired, all of them. Tired of running, tired of new places with new rules and new dangers, tired of being unwanted. Cole finished with the horses and walked over, his boots crunching on the creek stones. He didn't sit, just stood at a respectful distance, hands in his pockets. "We've got food at the house," he said. "May Lynn's probably got supper ready by now, but if you're hungry now, there's jerky in the wagon box." "We can wait," Hazel said. Cole nodded. "All right then. Few more minutes, then we'll get moving. Want to make it home before full dark." He walked back to check the wagon's wheel hubs, giving them space. Hazel watched him move, trying to categorize him. He wasn't friendly, but he wasn't cruel. He didn't smile, but he didn't leer. He kept his distance, spoke plainly, and his hands never moved in ways that made her skin crawl with warning. "Maybe he's just lonely," June suggested, following Hazel's gaze. "Maybe he wants company." "Men like that get dogs," Eli muttered. "Not kids." But there was less certainty in his voice now, just confusion and the heavy exhaustion of a 10-year-old who'd been forced to think like an adult for far too long. The Broken Pine Ranch appeared as the last light drained from the sky. The house, an outbuilding silhouetted against a violet horizon. It was bigger than Hazel had expected. A 2-story structure with a wide porch, several barns and corrals, a bunkhouse that looked currently unused. Lamplight glowed in the windows, warm and yellow. Cole drove the wagon up to the main house and set the brake. Before he could move to help them down, the front door opened and a woman emerged onto the porch. She was small and efficient-looking, probably in her 40s, with black hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp, intelligent eyes. She wore a simple dress with an apron, and she stood with her hands on her hips in a posture that suggested she took exactly no nonsense from anyone. "You're late?" she called out, her voice carrying a slight accent that Hazel couldn't quite place. "I told you to be back before dark." "Got delayed," Cole said, climbing down from the wagon. "May Lynn, these are the Carter children, Hazel, Eli, June, Noah, and Lily." May Lynn's expression shifted as she took in 5 pairs of eyes, staring at her from the wagon bed, wariness meeting assessment. Then her face softened, just slightly, around the edges. "Well," she said briskly, moving down the porch steps, "let's get you all inside. You look half frozen and completely starved. Food first, talk later." Hazel helped Lily down, then June, while Eli jumped down on his own and immediately positioned himself between Noah and the adults. May Lynn noticed, her eyes flicking to Cole, who gave the smallest shake of his head. Some communication passed between them, too quick for Hazel to interpret. "Come on then," Maylin said, gesturing toward the house. "Boots off at the door. There's a washroom just inside. I want hands and faces clean before you sit at my table. Food's hot, and there's plenty of it, so no need to rush or fight over portions." The interior of the house was clean and spare, furnished with solid, practical pieces that showed signs of use, but also care. The walls were bare of decoration except for a few landscape paintings and a large map of Montana territory. The washroom Maylin directed them to had a pump sink and clean towels, luxuries they hadn't encountered in months. Hazel supervised the washing, making sure Lily's hands were actually clean and not just wet, helping Noah with the pump when his small hands couldn't quite work it. Through the doorway, she could see into a dining room where a long table was set with plain dishes and serving bowls that steamed with food. When they emerged, Maylin was ladling stew into bowls with practiced efficiency. Cole had disappeared somewhere, his coat and hat gone from the hook by the door. Maylin noticed Hazel's searching look. "He's checking the horses one more time," she said. "He'll eat later. Sit, all of you. And I meant it about the food. There's plenty, and seconds if you want them. This isn't a place where children go hungry." They sat carefully, Hazel at one end with Lily in her lap, Eli on one side of the table, June and Noah on the other. The stew smelled like heaven, rich with meat and vegetables, thick with gravy. Fresh bread sat on a cutting board, still warm. There was butter, real butter. "Go on," Maylin prompted, taking a seat herself. "Eat." June picked up her spoon first, her hand trembling slightly. She took a small bite, then another, then looked up at Maylin with something like wonder in her eyes. "It's good," she whispered. "Of course it's good," Maylin said matter-of-factly. "I don't cook bad food." That broke something in the careful control Hazel had been maintaining. She felt her eyes burn, felt her throat close up. It was the matter-of-fact tone, the absence of pity or self-congratulation, the simple statement that this, warmth and food and plenty, was just how things were here, not some special dispensation they should be grateful for. She blinked hard, focusing on helping Lily eat, on making sure Noah took bites between his anxious surveillance of the room. Eli ate mechanically, his shoulders tight, clearly waiting for some other shoe to drop. Maylin watched them with sharp eyes that missed nothing, but she didn't comment on Noah's silence or Eli's hostility or the way Hazel portioned Lily's food into small, manageable bites. She just kept the bowls full and the bread coming and let the silence be comfortable rather than oppressive. Halfway through the meal, Cole returned. He washed his hands at the kitchen pump, then sat at the opposite end of the table from Hazel. Maylin served him without asking, and he ate with the same quiet efficiency he seemed to apply to everything else. "There's rooms upstairs," he said eventually, not looking directly at any of them. 4 bedrooms. Maylin's is down here off the kitchen. Figured the girls could share one room, boys another, for now. Unless you'd rather arrange it different." Hazel glanced at her siblings. June was nodding off over her stew, exhausted beyond words. Lily had already fallen asleep against Hazel's shoulder. Noah's eyes were still wide and alert, but heavy. Only Eli looked like he might last another hour. "That's fine," Hazel said. "For now." The "for now" hung in the air, an unspoken acknowledgement that nothing was permanent, that they were still assessing, still ready to run. Cole nodded as if she'd said something completely reasonable. "Maylin will show you up. There's clean nightclothes in the dresser, probably big on the little ones, but they'll do until we can get to town for proper sizing. Outhouse is out back, but there's chamber pots in the rooms for nighttime. Breakfast is at 6:30. You don't have to come down if you're not ready, but the food won't keep warm past 7. It was the most Hazel had heard him say at once. She nodded, trying to process this strange place with its clean towels and full bowls and a man who paid $200 for 5 unwanted children and then talked about breakfast times. Maylin led them upstairs after the meal, carrying Lily when Hazel's arms finally gave out. The girls' room was simple but clean, a large bed that could easily fit 3, a smaller trundle bed beneath it, a dresser, a washstand. The window looked out over the dark expanse of ranch land, and in the distance Hazel could see the faint glow of what might be the bunkhouse. "Boys are across the hall," Maylin said, setting Lily gently on the bed. "Bathroom's at the end, There's a tub, and you'll take baths tomorrow after you've rested. For tonight, just sleep." She moved to the dresser and pulled out nightgowns, simple cotton things that would swallow June and Lily, but would serve. Then she paused, her hand on the doorframe, and looked back at Hazel with something in her eyes that wasn't quite sympathy, but was definitely understanding. "The door locks from the inside," she said quietly, "if that makes you feel safer. And I'm a light sleeper. My room is directly below this one. You understand?" Hazel understood. She was being told, without it being spelled out, that there were boundaries here, protections, and that Mei Lin was an ally in maintaining them. "Thank you," Hazel whispered. Mei Lin nodded once, sharp and definitive, then left, pulling the door closed behind her. Hazel got her sisters into nightgowns, tucked them into the bed, and then checked on the boys across the hall. Eli was already in bed, still wearing his day clothes, lying on top of the covers with his arms crossed and his eyes open. Noah sat on the edge of the other bed, clutching a nightshirt but not putting it on. "I'll stay here tonight," Hazel said softly. "Door open? If you need me." Eli's eyes flicked to her, some of the rigid tension leaving his shoulders. Noah nodded, just barely, and finally pulled the nightshirt over his head. Hazel returned to the girls' room but left both doors open, then curled up on the trundle bed in her dress, too exhausted to change. Through the open doors and the quiet house, she could hear small sounds. The creak of floorboards as Mei Lin moved in her room below. The distant sound of the barn door closing as Cole finished his evening rounds. The whisper of wind against the window panes. Her siblings' breathing gradually slowed and deepened into sleep. But Hazel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had happened today. They'd been bought before, taken in before, promised safety before. And every time, it had turned rotten. Every time the adults had wanted something, labor or obedience or worse things that Hazel had learned to recognize in the way men looked at girls who had no one to protect them. But Cole Drayton hadn't looked at her like that. He'd barely looked at her at all, had treated her like a person conducting a business transaction, not a possession acquired for purposes left unspoken. And Mei Lin had the eyes of someone who'd seen hard things and survived them, who recognized wounded creatures and knew how to leave them space to heal. Maybe, Hazel thought, as her eyes finally began to drift closed, maybe this time would be different. But she slept in her dress anyway, with her shoes within reach, and her mental map of the house already forming, already planning escape routes. Just in case. The first week passed in a strange rhythm of watchfulness and routine. Cole left instructions with Mei Lin each morning, then disappeared into the ranch work, repairing fences, checking cattle, working in the barn. He was a presence felt more than seen, appearing at mealtimes and then vanishing again, never crowding, never demanding. Mei Lin ran the house with crisp efficiency, establishing rules that were clear and consistent, meals at set times, chores appropriate to age and ability, lessons in the afternoon using battered textbooks she produced from somewhere. She was firm but not harsh, expected effort but not perfection, and seemed to have an uncanny ability to know when to push and when to give space. June adapted quickest, her natural gentleness finding echo in the house's quiet rhythms. She helped Mei Lin with cooking, learned to set bread to rise, spent hours in the small library Cole apparently never used, reading everything she could reach. Lily was simply happy, fed and warm and allowed to be 4 years old. She followed Mei Lin like a duckling, chattering endlessly, and had taken to drawing pictures with charcoal on scraps of paper Mei Lin saved for her. Noah remained silent, but some of the constant tension had left his small body. He shadowed Cole when the rancher was around, watching from a careful distance as Cole worked with the horses, repaired tack, chopped wood. Cole seemed to accept this surveillance without comment, occasionally explaining what he was doing in that low, rough voice, never expecting response. Eli was the holdout, his distrust calcifying into active hostility. He did his chores with sullen precision, spoke only when directly addressed, and spent every free moment in the barn or out wandering the ranch boundaries, testing limits, looking for weaknesses. And Hazel watched everything. She cataloged the way Cole never touched them unnecessarily, how he averted his eyes when Mei Lin helped the girls with washing or dressing, how he kept his distance and his voice level. She noted that Mei Lin slept with her door open, that Cole's room was on the far side of the house from the children's rooms, that there were locks on doors and clear lines drawn. She watched for cracks in the facade, for signs that the kindness was performance, that payment would eventually be demanded for the food and shelter and clean clothes. But the cracks didn't appear. On the 8th day, a Sunday, Cole asked Hazel to walk with him to check the fence line in the north pasture. It was the first time he'd specifically requested her presence, and she felt Eli's eyes burning into her back as she followed Cole out of the yard. They walked in silence for a while, Cole's long stride slow enough that Hazel could keep pace. The November air was cold but clear, the sky that painful, brilliant blue that only comes in high country autumn. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against golden grass. "You're wondering when the other shoe drops," Cole said eventually. Hazel saw no point in lying. "Yes. And your brother thinks I have some plan that involves working you all to death or selling you off." Something like that. Cole stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression as unreadable as ever. "I'm not good with people," he said bluntly. "Maylin could tell you, I lived alone here for 5 years before she showed up looking for work and refused to take no for an answer. I don't know how to be warm or comforting or any of those things children probably need." Hazel waited, sensing there was more. "But I know what it's like to not have a place," Cole continued. "I know what it's like to be passed around, used up, told you're worth less than the dirt you sleep on. And I know that when someone finally gives you a chance to be more than that, you remember it. You remember who extended the hand." He looked out over the ranch, his jaw working slightly. "I don't have use for 5 children. I don't need the labor. I can hire hands if I need them. I don't need the company. I'm comfortable alone. What I saw on that platform was 5 people refusing to break. And that's rare enough to be worth preserving." Hazel felt something shift in her chest, some locked-tight place beginning to ease. "That's it? That's the reason?" "That's it." Cole met her eyes again. "I won't lie and say I'll be a good father. I don't know how to be that. But I can promise you safety, food, and the chance to stay together. And I can promise that as long as you want to be here, you have a place. And when we're old enough to work, when we can earn our keep, then you can choose to work the ranch if you want, or you can choose to leave and do something else. I'll teach you what I know either way, and you'll have learned skills that'll serve you anywhere. But that's years from now, and it's not conditional." He paused. "Nothing here is conditional, Hazel. You're not paying off a debt. You're just here." Hazel looked at this strange, closed-off man who bought 5 children on a whim and then gave them space to heal, who promised safety without demanding gratitude, who seemed to understand that trust couldn't be bought, only earned through steady proof over time. "Eli won't believe you," she said. "I know, that's all right. He'll believe me when he's ready, or he won't. The offer doesn't change either way." Noah doesn't talk. "I noticed. That's all right too. He will when he wants to, or he won't." June has nightmares. Maylin knows. She hears them too. That's why she keeps her door open. Hazel's throat tightened. "I don't know how to not be in charge of them." Cole's expression shifted just slightly into something that might have been sympathy. "Learn," he said simply. "You've got time now. Use it." They walked back to the house in silence, but it was a different quality of silence, less wary, more contemplative. When they reached the yard, Eli was waiting on the porch, his arms crossed, his expression thunderous. "I'm fine," Hazel told him before he could speak. "We just talked." "About what?" "About staying." Eli's eyes narrowed. "We're not staying." "Maybe we are," Hazel said softly. "Maybe it's time to stop running. And maybe he's just better at lying than the others were." Cole had continued past them toward the barn, giving them privacy for this argument. But he paused at Eli's words, turning back. "You're right," he said to Eli, his voice carrying across the yard. "Maybe I am. You've got no reason to trust me, and I'm not asking you to. But I'm also not asking you to leave. Stay suspicious, keep your guard up, protect your siblings, do whatever you need to do to feel safe. Just do it here, where at least you're warm and fed while you're doing it." Then he disappeared into the barn, leaving Eli staring after him with an expression somewhere between fury and confusion. "I hate him," Eli muttered, but there was less conviction in it than before. "I know," Hazel said. Come on, Maylin's teaching June to make pie crust. We should learn too. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and apples. Noah sat at the kitchen table, carefully peeling apples with a paring knife too big for his hands, his small face scrunched in concentration. Maylin guided his hands patiently, showing him how to work with the blade's curve. Lily sat on the floor, arranging apple peels into elaborate spirals. June looked up when Hazel and Eli entered, flour dusting her nose, and smiled, actually smiled, bright and genuine. "Look, Hazel, I made a circle." Hazel looked at the lumpy, decidedly non-circular pie crust and felt her eyes burn. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. This was the danger of hope, she realized. Not that it would be crushed. They'd survived crushed hope before. The danger was that it would take root despite every effort to resist it, would grow in the spaces between watchfulness and fear, would bloom into something that looked terribly, frighteningly like belonging. But as Maylin handed her a rolling pin and June scooted over to make room at the table and Noah's small hand briefly touched her arm, Hazel thought maybe, just maybe, dangerous hope was better than safe emptiness. At least dangerous hope tasted like apple pie on a Sunday afternoon, in a kitchen that smelled like home. The first snow came 3 weeks after their arrival, soft and silent in the pre-dawn hours. Hazel woke to an unfamiliar brightness filtering through the curtains and the hushed quality that only fresh snowfall brings. Beside her, June and Lily still slept, their breathing deep and even, June's arm thrown protectively across her little sister. Hazel slipped from the trundle bed and padded to the window, pressing her palm against the cold glass. The ranch had transformed overnight into something out of a storybook, every fence post topped with white, the barn roof thick with it, the distant pines frosted like cake decorations. In the gray light before sunrise, she could see Cole already moving through the yard toward the barn, his breath visible in clouds, his shoulders dusted with snow. "Is it Christmas?" Lily's sleepy voice came from the bed. "Not yet, baby. Just snow." "I've never seen snow before." June sat up, rubbing her eyes, then scrambled to the window. Oh, it's beautiful." They dressed quickly in the warm clothes Maylin had procured on a town trip. Wool stockings, flannel dresses, thick sweaters that actually fit. When they came downstairs, they found Eli and Noah already in the kitchen, both boys pressed against the window like June had been, their faces reflected in the glass. Maylin stood at the stove, flipping hotcakes with practiced efficiency. "First snow's always special," she said without turning around. "But don't let it fool you. It's also work. Cole will need help clearing paths to the barn and chicken coop. And someone's got to make sure the livestock have access to water that hasn't frozen over." "Can we help?" June asked, her eagerness transparent. "After breakfast and proper bundling, I won't have anyone catching their death because they ran out in the snow half-dressed." Maylin slid hot cakes onto plates, added butter and syrup. "Eat. Cole's already been out an hour, and he'll need coffee when he comes back in." They ate quickly, the excitement of snow making even Noah's movements less cautious, more childlike. When Cole stamped into the mudroom 20 minutes later, shaking snow from his hat, Eli was the one who spoke first. "Maylin said you need help with the paths." Cole paused in the act of hanging his coat, surprise flickering across his usually impassive features. "That right?" "I can shovel." Eli's chin lifted defensively, as if expecting rejection. "I've done it before." "I don't doubt it." Cole poured himself coffee, warming his hands on the cup. "Path to the barn's clear, but the chicken coop and the woodshed still need work. You know how to pace yourself? Snow shoveling isn't a race." "I know." "Then grab the spare shovel from the barn and put on the heavier coat, the one on the third peg. Yours isn't thick enough for this kind of work." Something shifted in Eli's expression, not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of respect. He nodded and headed for the mudroom, and Noah, after a moment's hesitation, followed him. "Not you," Cole said, his voice gentle. "You're too small for the shovel, and the cold's not kind to little ones, but I could use someone to help carry feed to the horses." "If you're willing." Noah's eyes went wide. He glanced at Hazel, seeking permission, and she nodded. He moved to Cole's side with tentative steps, and Cole handed him a small bucket, showing him how to hold it so the weight distributed evenly. "We'll take it slow," Cole told him. "And if your hands get cold, you tell me. Frostbite's nothing to mess with." Hazel watched them go, Noah's small figure bundled in layers, walking beside Cole's tall frame with something that almost looked like eagerness. June tugged at her sleeve. "Can we make something with the snow?" Maylin turned from the stove, her expression thoughtful. "The bread's rising, and I don't need help with lunch for another hour. I suppose a snow fort wouldn't hurt, long as you stay where I can see you from the window." The girls bundled into their outerwear and spilled into the front yard, where the snow lay pristine and unmarked. Lily immediately flopped backward, trying to make snow angels, while June packed snowballs with scientific precision. Hazel stood for a moment, just breathing in the sharp, clean air, feeling the weight of constant vigilance ease just slightly. "Build the fort here," she instructed, marking out a space near the porch. "We can use it as a base." They worked for an hour, their mittened hands clumsy but determined, piling snow into walls and patting them firm. Hazel found herself laughing, actually laughing, when Lily tried to roll a snowball bigger than herself and ended up rolling downhill with it. June's careful engineering resulted in walls that were uneven but solid, with strategic gaps for throwing snowballs through. From the barn, Hazel could hear Eli's voice, sharp with instruction, telling Noah something about proper lifting technique. The sound carried across the snow-muffled yard, and she realized it was the most animated she'd heard her brother sound since their mother died. When Cole and Noah emerged from the barn, the little boy's cheeks were pink with cold, and something else, maybe happiness. He carried his empty bucket with pride, and when Lily ran to show him the snow fort, he actually smiled. "Impressive engineering," Cole said, examining their work with the same seriousness he'd apply to fence repairs. "Good sight lines, solid construction. You planning to defend against invaders?" "We're defending against Eli," June explained. "He'll want to attack it." Smart tactical thinking. Cole's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. "You'll want to stockpile ammunition and maybe build a back exit in case you need to retreat." He showed them how to pack snow into denser projectiles, how to create a small cache hidden behind the wall. And when Eli finally emerged from clearing the chicken coop path, red-faced and sweating despite the cold, Cole gave the girls exactly enough warning to prepare their defense. The snowball fight that followed was chaotic and lopsided and absolutely joyful. Eli's aim was deadly, but June's strategic stockpiling paid off, and Lily's wild throws somehow managed to hit their target through sheer unpredictability. Noah didn't throw any snowballs, but he packed them for his sisters with focused intensity, and once, when Eli got too close to their fort, Noah grabbed a handful of loose snow and flung it directly in his brother's face. The shocked silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds before Eli started laughing, real laughter, the kind that bent him double and made him gasp for air. And then they were all laughing, even Noah, his small shoulders shaking with giggles that had no sound but were laughter nonetheless. Maylin called them in for lunch when their mittens were soaked through and their faces burned with cold. Cole retreated to the barn, claiming work to finish, but Hazel had seen his expression as he watched them play. Something lonely and wistful, like a man looking at something he'd never had and didn't quite know how to reach for. That night, after supper and evening chores, after the children were bathed and changed into nightclothes, Hazel found Cole in the barn, mending tack by lamplight. She stood in the doorway, unsure whether to interrupt. "Something you need?" he asked without looking up. "I wanted to say thank you for today. Kids needed to play. Nothing to thank me for." Hazel stepped into the barn, the smell of leather and hay and horses familiar and comforting. "You could have just hired us out to work. That's what most people do with orphans." Cole's hands stilled on the leather strap he'd been working. "You're not orphans. You're children. There's a difference." "Not to most people." "I'm not most people." He set down his tools and finally looked at her. "Your brother worked hard today, but he also smiled. When's the last time you saw that?" Hazel had to think about it. "Before our mother got sick. Maybe a year and a half ago." "Then today was worth it for that alone." Cole picked up the tack again, his scarred hands moving with practiced precision. "You're all wound so tight you're about to snap, Hazel. All of you. You need time to remember what it's like to just be young. That's not charity. That's just sense. And when we remember, when we get comfortable, what happens when you decide 5 kids is too much after all?" The question had been building in her for weeks, sharp and afraid. Cole's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. I won't lie to you and promise forever. I don't know what forever looks like, but I can promise you that I won't put you back on that auction platform. If things don't work here, if you decide to leave or I decide I can't manage, we'll find something better. Together. You won't be abandoned again. It wasn't a fairy tale promise. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and honesty was what Hazel had learned to value above everything else. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. She turned to leave, but Cole's voice stopped her. Hazel, your brother, the way he doesn't talk. Something happened to him. It wasn't a question. Hazel felt her throat close up, felt the familiar rage and helplessness rise. At a foster placement, before we went to the county home, a man thought Noah was too loud, so he... She stopped, unable to say it. I understand. Cole's voice was very quiet. And the man? Gone before we could tell anyone. They moved us before we could press charges, said we were lying for attention. Cole's hands had gone still again, his knuckles white on the leather. When he spoke, his voice was controlled but edged with something cold and sharp. If you ever see that man again, you tell me. You understand? You tell me immediately. The protective fury in his tone surprised her. This wasn't the distant, controlled rancher. This was someone who understood what it meant to be small and powerless, and hurt by people who should have protected you. I will, Hazel promised. She left him there in the lamplight, bent over his work, and something in her chest that had been locked tight for months loosened just a fraction more. The winter deepened around them, and with it, routine became rhythm, became something almost like stability. Cole taught Eli to work with the horses, showing him how to read their moods, how to gentle them with patience rather than force. Eli fought it at first, his anger making him rough. But the horses wouldn't tolerate rough handling, and eventually he learned. June discovered Cole's untouched library and claimed it as her own, reading everything from agricultural manuals to the scattered novels that suggested someone, sometime, had lived in this house who loved stories. Maylin taught her to cook, to preserve food, to manage a household, and June absorbed it all with quiet hunger. Lily simply bloomed. She followed Maylin everywhere, chattering endlessly, making up songs and stories, drawing pictures that gradually evolved from scribbles into recognizable shapes. She called Maylin Auntie May and Cole Mr. Cole, and seemed to have completely forgotten that 3 months ago she'd been sleeping on a thin mattress in a county home, always hungry, always cold. Noah remained silent, but the terror had left his eyes. He shadowed Cole when permitted, helped with small tasks, learned to curry horses and collect eggs, and split kindling. And slowly, so slowly Hazel almost missed it. He began to make small sounds, not words, but noises of effort or surprise, or once, a hum that matched the tune Lily was singing. Hazel herself learned to breathe without constantly scanning for threats. She learned that Maylin's sharp tongue never came with a raised hand, that Cole's silences weren't brooding but simply his natural state, that the rules in this house were consistent and fair and didn't change based on adult moods. But the town was a different matter entirely. The first time they went into town as a family was in mid-December, when Cole decided they needed proper winter clothes, and Maylin declared the children needed to be measured for church clothes, whether they attended church or not. They piled into the wagon, all 5 children, Maylin and Cole, and made the 15-mile journey to Silverton, the nearest settlement of any size. Silverton was a typical Montana town, built around ranching and mining, with a main street of false-fronted buildings and side streets of modest homes. The general store anchored one end of town, the saloon the other, with a church, schoolhouse, and assorted businesses in between. The stairs started the moment they climbed down from the wagon. Hazel felt them like physical weight, the way conversations stopped when they passed, how women clutched their children closer, how men exchanged significant looks. She heard the whispers, not quite quiet enough. That's Cole Drayton. Heard he took in 5 orphans. 5? What's a bachelor want with 5 children? Probably got them cheap, free labor. I heard they're wild, completely unmanageable. Maylin's spine straightened, her jaw setting in a way Hazel had learned meant trouble for anyone fool enough to push. Cole's expression didn't change at all, but his hand came to rest briefly on Hazel's shoulder. a gesture of solidarity, of protection. They entered the general store, and the merchant, a portly man named Henderson, greeted Cole with professional courtesy that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Drayton, I heard you'd taken on some wards." "These are the Carter children," Cole said evenly. "They need winter clothes, full outfits for each, plus extras. And shoes, growing children's feet, so account for that." Henderson's gaze swept over them with unconcealed assessment. "That'll be a considerable expense." "I'm aware. Can you manage it, or should I take my business elsewhere?" The merchant's expression soured, but he gestured toward the ready-made section. "I can manage it, though I'll need to special order the smaller sizes. We don't often stock children's clothing in quantity." Maitland took charge of the measuring and selecting, her sharp eyes missing nothing, rejecting anything of inferior quality or improper fit. June stood patiently for the measuring tape, but Eli radiated hostility, his fists clenched at his sides. Noah pressed close to Hazel, his breathing shallow. A woman entered the store, middle-aged, expensively dressed by frontier standards, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and then trained to express disapproval. She swept the children with a glance that was both invasive and dismissive. "Cole Drayton," she said, her voice carrying. "I heard the rumors, but I confess I didn't quite believe them." "Mrs. Halston," Cole's tone cooled perceptibly. "Didn't realize my household arrangements were subject to public referendum. When it involves the moral character of our community, everything is subject to scrutiny." Vera Halston stepped closer, her skirts rustling with aggressive propriety. "5 children, Cole, unchaperoned with a bachelor. They're chaperoned by Mei Lin, as you can plainly see, and I don't recall asking for your opinion on the matter. A Chinese housekeeper is hardly proper supervision." Vera's eyes swept to Mei Lin with open contempt. "This situation is inappropriate at best, and at worst, well, people talk." Mei Lin's hands stilled on the measuring tape she'd been using on June. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but edged like a blade. "People always talk, Mrs. Halston. Usually it's because their own lives are too empty to be interesting." Vera's face flushed. "How dare you?" "That's enough." Cole's voice cut through the rising tension. "My arrangements are legal and proper, filed with the county and approved by the judge who oversees orphan placements. If you have concerns, take them up with Judge Morrison. Otherwise, I'd appreciate you keeping your speculation to yourself." "I'm not the only one concerned, Cole. Others have noticed. Others are asking questions." "Then let them ask." Cole turned his back on her, a deliberate dismissal. "Henderson, wrap up what we've selected and send the bill to the ranch. We'll take the items that fit now. The rest can be delivered when they arrive." They left the store with 2 parcels and Vera Halston's poisonous glare burning into their backs. The children were silent on the walk back to the wagon, the joy of new clothes overshadowed by the encounter. Hazel saw how Eli's shoulders had gone rigid again, how Noah had retreated into himself, how even Lily sensed the tension and clung to June's hand. Cole loaded the parcels with controlled movements, his jaw tight. Mei Lin climbed into the wagon with unusual force, her expression thunderous. "That woman," Mei Lin hissed, "is a viper in church clothes." "She's influential," Cole said quietly. "She sits on half the town committees and has the ear of most of the prominent families." "Then the prominent families are fools." They rode in silence for a while, the town falling away behind them, replaced by open country and the clean sweep of winter wind. Finally, June spoke up, her voice small. "Are we making trouble for you, Mr. Cole?" Cole's hands tightened on the reins, but he didn't turn around. "You're not making trouble, June. Some people make their own trouble, then try to blame others for it." "But that lady said—" "That lady," Mei Lin interrupted sharply, "is angry because her own life didn't turn out the way she wanted, and she thinks making others miserable will somehow make her feel better. It won't. It never does. But that doesn't stop people from trying." Eli shifted in the wagon bed, his voice carefully neutral. "We could leave, if it's going to cause you problems." "Where would you go?" Cole asked. "I don't know. Somewhere." "Somewhere," Cole repeated. "That's worked out well for you so far, has it?" The bitterness in Eli's laugh was painful to hear. Better than being the reason someone gets run out of their own town. Cole pulled the wagon to a stop, right there in the middle of the road, and turned to face the children. His expression was still controlled, but there was something fierce beneath it, something Hazel had only glimpsed before. You listen to me, all of you. I've lived in Silverton territory for 8 years. I built that ranch from nothing, with my own hands and my own money. I pay my bills, I don't cause trouble, and I sure as hell don't owe Vera Halston or anyone else an explanation for how I choose to live. If she wants to make noise, let her. She's got more wind than sense, and eventually people will see that. But what if they don't? June whispered. Then they don't. I stopped living my life according to what small-minded people think a long time ago. He paused, his pale eyes moving from face to face. You didn't ask to be orphaned. You didn't ask for the world to treat you like you're disposable. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let a bunch of gossips with nothing better to do convince you that you're the problem. You're not. You never were. Hazel felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been armored over with years of hearing exactly the opposite, that they were too much, too many, too expensive, too broken, that their very existence was an imposition on the world's patience. Why? She asked, the question torn from somewhere deep. Why does it matter to you what happens to us? Cole looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time since she'd known him, something raw showed in his expression. Because I was you, he said quietly. 30 years ago, I was exactly you, standing on a platform, being assessed like livestock, watching families walk away because I wasn't worth the trouble. The man who finally took me in, he was hard, and he wasn't kind, but he gave me a chance to be something other than disposable. I'm not him. I'm trying to do better than he did. But I understand what it means to be looked at like you're less than human, and I won't abide it. Not for you, not from anyone. The silence that followed was profound. Even the wind seemed to quiet, as if the whole Montana landscape was holding its breath. Oh, Lily said softly. You were lonely too. Cole's expression shifted, something almost like pain crossing his features. Yeah, little one, I was lonely too. Noah, who had been sitting tucked against Hazel's side, slowly extracted himself and made his way to the front of the wagon. He climbed over the seat with awkward determination and sat down next to Cole, pressed against the rancher's side, his small hand coming to rest on Cole's arm. Cole looked down at the silent child, and his throat worked visibly. His free hand came up to rest gently on Noah's head, just for a moment, and Hazel saw his eyes close briefly against some emotion he wouldn't name. All right then, Cole said roughly, clearing his throat. We've got a ranch to run and work to do. Enough standing around in the cold having feelings. But the words were softer than usual, and when he set the wagon moving again, he let Noah stay in the front seat, the little boy's presence clearly both a comfort and a weight. The incident in town marked a shift. The children, who had been slowly beginning to believe in their place at the Broken Pine, now understood that the world outside might not agree, and Cole, who had maintained careful distance, had shown them something vulnerable and true. School became the next battleground. Mei Lin had been teaching them at home, but Montana law required children to attend school if one was within reasonable distance. Silverton had a schoolhouse, and in January, Mei Lin insisted it was time. They need to be around other children, she told Cole over breakfast while the kids were upstairs getting ready. They need to learn how to exist in the world, not just on this ranch. The world hasn't been kind to them. All the more reason they need to learn how to navigate it. Mei Lin's expression was firm. You can't protect them forever, Cole, and isolation will hurt them worse than a few schoolyard scuffles. Cole didn't argue, but his expression suggested he wanted to. The Silverton schoolhouse was a one-room structure that served children from ages 6 to 14. The teacher, Miss Sarah Brennan, was young, probably not more than 22, with kind eyes and a Boston accent that marked her as an outsider herself. She greeted the Carter children with careful warmth when Cole brought them on that first Monday, assessing their reading levels and arithmetic skills with quick efficiency. Hazel can work with the advanced readers, she said, making notes. June as well. She's reading above her age level. Eli will join the middle group for most subjects. Noah? She paused, looking at the silent boy. Noah will work at his own pace. I understand he's had some difficulties. He doesn't speak, Cole said bluntly. But he understands everything. He can read and write adequately for his age. He just won't talk. Miss Brennan nodded thoughtfully. That's all right. Some of my best students are the quiet ones. He can write out his answers if needed. The first week was tentative. The other children watched the Carters with open curiosity, mixed with the wariness children absorb from their parents' prejudices. But Miss Brennan ran a firm classroom, and open cruelty wasn't tolerated. It was the second week when things turned ugly. A boy named Thomas Halston, Vera's grandson, all elbows and entitlement, cornered June during the lunch break. Hazel was helping Miss Brennan organize books inside and didn't see it happen until it was too late. My grandmother says you're charity cases, Thomas announced, his voice carrying across the schoolyard. Says your new daddy probably wants you for something bad. Says no man takes in 5 kids unless he's got twisted reasons. June's face went white. She clutched her lunch pail tighter, trying to step around Thomas, but he blocked her path. Says you're probably lying about how he treats you. Says someone should check on you girls. Make sure you're not... He didn't get to finish the sentence. Hazel hit him from the side, her small fist connecting with his jaw hard enough to knock him down. Then she was on top of him, all elbows and fury, landing blows wherever she could reach. "Don't you talk about us!" she screamed, months of controlled fear and anger finally finding an outlet. "Don't you dare!" Strong hands pulled her off, and she fought them too until she realized it was Eli, his voice urgent in her ear. "Hazel, stop! Stop! You're making it worse!" She stopped struggling, breathing hard, and looked around at the circle of children watching with wide eyes. Thomas was crying, his nose bleeding, scrambling backward in the dirt. And standing in the doorway of the schoolhouse, her face pale with shock, was Miss Brennan. "Inside," the teacher said quietly. "Hazel, inside, right now." Hazel went, her hands shaking, June right behind her. Miss Brennan closed the door and stood there for a moment, gathering herself. "I won't have violence in my schoolyard," she said finally, "regardless of provocation." "He said," Hazel started, but Miss Brennan held up a hand. "I know what he said. I heard the end of it, and it was cruel and inappropriate, and I'll be addressing that with Thomas separately. But you cannot hit other students, Hazel. You simply cannot." "He was talking about Mr. Cole like we were..." Hazel couldn't get the words out, couldn't articulate the particular horror of what Thomas had been implying. Miss Brennan's expression softened slightly. "I understand. But you need to learn other ways to handle that, because this won't be the last time someone says something cruel. And if you respond with your fists every time, you'll be the one labeled as the problem, not them. That's not fair, but it's true. So what am I supposed to do? Just let them say it? You come to me. You tell me and I handle it. That's why I'm here." Miss Brennan crouched down to Hazel's level. "I know you're used to fighting your own battles. I know you've had to protect your siblings on your own, but you're not on your own anymore. You have adults who will stand up for you. You have to let us." Hazel wanted to believe her, but adults had been saying things like that her whole life, and most of them had proved useless when it mattered. "Will you tell Mr. Cole?" June asked nervously. "I have to. He's your guardian, and there was a physical altercation. He needs to know." Hazel felt her stomach drop. Cole had taken them in, protected them, given them a home, and she'd repaid him by starting a fight that would only fuel the gossip Vera Halston was spreading. When Cole arrived to collect them that afternoon, his face was unreadable. He listened to Miss Brennan's account in silence, thanked her, and loaded the children into the wagon without comment. The ride home was tense and quiet, Hazel's dread growing with every mile. At the ranch, he sent the other children inside with Mei Lin, then gestured for Hazel to follow him to the barn. She went, her heart pounding, preparing for anger or disappointment, or worse, the quiet statement that she'd finally pushed too far, that 5 children was too much trouble after all. Cole closed the barn door and turned to face her, his arms crossed. "Tell me what happened." Hazel recited the events mechanically, leaving nothing out. When she finished, Cole was quiet for a long moment. "You know fighting isn't the answer." "Yes, sir." "You know it's going to make things harder, give people more ammunition to use against us." "Yes, sir." "You know Miss Brennan could have expelled you, sent you back to the county home." Hazel's breath caught. Is that... Are you... No. Cole's voice gentled slightly. I'm not sending you anywhere. I'm trying to make you understand the stakes. I understand the stakes. The words burst out of her, sharp with frustration. I understand that people think I understand what they're saying, and I can't just stand there and let them say it. Why not? The question caught her off guard. Because it's lies. So? Let them be lies. Let people think what they want. Why does it matter? Because... Hazel struggled to articulate the tangled mess of fear and anger and fierce protectiveness. Because you gave us a home, and they're trying to make it dirty. They're trying to make it into something ugly and wrong, and it's not. It's the first place we've ever felt safe, and I won't let them ruin it. Her voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly she was crying, great gulping sobs that she'd been holding back for weeks. Cole stood there looking awkward and uncertain, clearly out of his depth with a crying child, before finally stepping forward and resting one hand on her shoulder. Listen to me, he said quietly. People like Vera Halston, they're going to talk no matter what you do. You could be perfect, never put a foot wrong, and they'd still find something to criticize. That's not about you. It's about them needing to feel superior, needing to have someone to look down on. You can't fight that with your fists. All you can do is live your life in a way you're proud of and let their words fall away like rain off a roof. But they're hurting you, your reputation. Cole actually smiled at that, a bitter twist of his mouth. Hazel, I don't have a reputation to protect. I'm a loner who lives 15 miles from town and barely speaks to anyone. I've never tried to be part of their community, never cared what they thought of me. That hasn't changed just because you're here now. But nothing. You want to protect me? Then focus on learning, on growing up strong and capable. Show them that children who've been through hell can still become decent human beings. That's the best revenge there is, proving them wrong just by existing and thriving. Hazel wiped her eyes with her sleeve, trying to absorb this. I'm sorry I hit him. I know, and you'll apologize to Miss Brennan and to Thomas, even though he deserved it. Not because what he said was acceptable, it wasn't, but because you need to learn how to take the high road even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. What if I can't? Cole's hand squeezed her shoulder briefly. Then you try again and again, until it gets easier. That's all any of us can do. They stood there in the dusty barn light, the weight of the conversation settling around them. Finally, Hazel took a shaky breath and nodded. Okay, I'll try. That's all I ask. Cole stepped back, his usual distance reasserting itself. Now go inside and help Mei Lin with supper, and later you'll write out that apology. We'll deliver it to the school tomorrow. Hazel headed for the door, then paused. Mr. Cole, thank you for not being angry. I am angry, Cole said, just not at you. The look in his eyes when he said it made Hazel think that Thomas Halston had better hope Cole never ran into him alone in town. The thought should probably have worried her. Instead, it made her feel protected in a way she never had before. The apology was delivered the next morning, written in Hazel's careful script on paper Mei Lin had provided. Miss Brennan accepted it with a nod and a warning that any future violence would result in suspension, no matter the provocation. Thomas Halston sat in the back row with a bruised jaw and wouldn't meet Hazel's eyes, which she counted as a small victory, even though she knew it shouldn't. The weeks that followed were a careful dance of tension and tentative normalcy. At school, the Carter children kept to themselves during breaks, forming a tight unit that other students observed but rarely penetrated. At home, they fell into rhythms that felt increasingly permanent: morning chores before school, evening chores after, supper together at the long table, and the slow unwinding of the day in lamplight while Mei Lin mended clothes and Cole reviewed account books. February brought a cold snap that froze the creek solid and turned the ranch into a landscape of crystalline white and dark pine. Cole spent long hours breaking ice for the cattle, and Eli began accompanying him without being asked, learning the hard work of keeping livestock alive through Montana winter. The boy's anger was transforming into something else, something more like purpose, though he still carried wariness in the set of his shoulders and the way he watched Cole when he thought the rancher wasn't looking. It was during this cold spell that Noah finally spoke. They were in the barn on a Saturday afternoon, all 5 children helping Cole muck out stalls while Mei Lin worked on mending tack. Lily was singing one of her nonsense songs. June was explaining something about the book she'd been reading, and Eli was complaining about the smell. Noah stood in the corner of the stall he'd been assigned, pitchfork in his small hands, working with methodical determination. One of the barn cats, a half-wild orange tom that usually avoided human contact, wandered into the stall and wound itself around Noah's legs. The boy froze, looking down at the cat with wide eyes. The tom purred, loud as a motor, and bumped its head against Noah's shin. "Cat likes you," Cole observed from the next stall over, his voice casual. Noah set down the pitchfork very carefully and crouched, extending one trembling hand toward the cat. The tom sniffed his fingers, then allowed itself to be petted, its purr intensifying. Noah's face transformed with something like wonder, and his mouth opened. "Orange," he whispered, the word barely audible but unmistakable. Every pitchfork in the barn went still. Hazel's heart stopped, then started again with painful force. June's hands flew to her mouth. Eli turned so fast he nearly dropped his tool. Cole moved into Noah's stall with slow, careful steps, as if approaching a spooked horse. He crouched down beside the boy, not touching, just present. "That's right," he said quietly. "Orange. Good strong color for a cat." Noah's fingers tangled in the tom's fur, and he looked up at Cole with eyes that were still frightened but also hopeful, testing to see if this small act of speech would bring punishment or mockery or the cruel laughter that had silenced him in the first place. Cole's expression remained steady, calm, giving nothing but acceptance. "You want to name him? Cat's been hanging around for months, but he hasn't got a proper name yet." Noah's mouth worked, forming shapes around sounds that wanted to emerge but couldn't quite make it. Finally, he managed another whisper. "Orange." "Orange it is then. Simple and honest. I like it." Cole stood, offering his hand to help Noah up. The boy took it, still clutching the cat against his chest with his other arm, and the tom permitted this indignity with remarkable patience. Mei Lin appeared in the stall doorway, her eyes bright with tears she was too dignified to let fall. "Well now," she said, her voice only slightly unsteady. "Seems that cat's made himself a friend. Better bring him inside and make sure he's got food and water. Can't have Noah's cat going hungry." The casual way she said Noah's cat, as if it were already an established fact rather than a momentous occasion, was exactly the right tone. Noah nodded, still not quite believing he was allowed to keep speaking, keep wanting, keep claiming things as his own. That night at supper, Noah didn't say anything more, but Orange sat at his feet under the table, and whenever someone addressed Noah directly, he would nod or shake his head instead of just staring with frightened eyes. It was progress measured in inches, but after months of total silence, inches felt like miles. Hazel caught Cole's eye across the table and saw something in his expression that she was beginning to recognize. A fierce protectiveness wrapped in layers of careful control, the look of someone who understood what it cost to reclaim your voice after someone had tried to take it from you. The next blow came from a direction they hadn't anticipated. In early March, as the worst of winter began to break and the first hints of spring appeared in sheltered valleys, a man arrived at the ranch driving a county wagon. He was thin and officious, with wire-rimmed spectacles and the pinched expression of someone who took his authority very seriously. Cole met him in the yard, and Hazel watched from the barn where she'd been helping Eli repair a broken fence rail. Something about the man's posture, the way he carried a leather folder like a weapon, made her stomach clench with old familiar dread. "Mr. Drayton?" the man called out, climbing down from the wagon with fussy precision. "I'm Bernard Whitmore, County Social Inspector. I'm here to conduct a welfare inspection regarding the minor children in your custody." Cole's expression didn't change, but Hazel saw his hands curl into fists before he deliberately relaxed them. "I wasn't aware an inspection had been scheduled." "The county doesn't require advance notice for welfare checks, Mr. Drayton. Surely you were informed of this when you took custody of the children." Whitmore extracted papers from his folder, consulting them with exaggerated care. "I'll need to see the children's living quarters, inspect their general health and well-being, and conduct brief private interviews with each child." "Private interviews?" Cole's voice had gone flat and dangerous. "About what exactly?" Standard questions regarding their treatment, their daily routines, whether they feel safe and adequately cared for. Whitmore looked up from his papers, his eyes cold behind the spectacles. Surely if everything is as it should be, you have no objection to cooperating fully. I have no objection to transparency. I have significant objections to some stranger interrogating traumatized children without support present. The interviews must be conducted without the guardian present to ensure honest answers, Mr. Drayton. That's protocol. Mei Lin had emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron, her sharp eyes taking in the situation with quick assessment. What's this about? County inspection, Cole said shortly. Apparently we've been reported as potentially inadequate guardians. Reported by whom? Mei Lin's voice could have cut glass. I'm not at liberty to disclose the source of complaints, ma'am, but rest assured the county takes all reports of child welfare concerns very seriously. Hazel didn't need to be told who had made the report. Vera Halston's vindictive satisfaction was practically visible in the air, a poisonous presence that had followed them from town and manifested now in this bureaucrat with his papers and his power to destroy everything they'd built. You'll want to call the children in, Whitmore continued, already moving toward the house as if he owned it. And I'll need to see their sleeping arrangements, bathing facilities, food stores, and educational materials. The inspection took 2 hours that felt like 2 years. Whitmore examined every corner of the house with suspicious attention, made notes about everything from the number of blankets on the beds to the contents of the pantry. He questioned Mei Lin about her background and qualifications, his tone suggesting he found a Chinese housekeeper inherently suspect. He measured the distance between Cole's bedroom and the children's rooms as if proximity itself were evidence of wrongdoing. Then came the interviews. Lily went first, too young to understand the danger, chattering about Orange the cat and Auntie May's cooking and the snow fort they'd built. Whitmore's expression suggested he found her cheerfulness suspicious rather than reassuring. June went next, her hands twisted together with nerves, answering questions in a small voice about school and chores and whether Mr. Cole ever came into the girls' room. The implication in that question made Hazel's skin crawl, made her want to grab June and run, but she forced herself to stay still, to let her sister handle it. When June emerged, her face was pale but composed. He asked horrible things, she whispered to Hazel. Things that made Mr. Cole sound like a monster. I told him the truth, but I don't think he believed me. Eli's interview lasted longer, his natural hostility working against him as Whitmore probed for evidence of excessive labor, physical punishment, or neglect. When Eli finally came out, he was shaking with suppressed rage. He wanted me to say Cole beats us, Eli hissed. Kept asking leading questions, trying to get me to agree that the work is too hard, that we're scared, that we're not properly supervised, like he already decided what the answer should be and was just waiting for me to say it. Noah refused to go in at all. He pressed himself against Hazel's side, trembling, and when Whitmore tried to insist, Cole stepped between them. The boy doesn't speak, Cole said flatly. You were informed of this in the case file. You can observe him, but you will not force him into a situation that terrifies him. I need to ensure he hasn't been silenced through abuse, Mr. Drayton. Cole's voice went very quiet, very controlled. If you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, you can take your implications and get off my property right now. That child's silence has nothing to do with me or this household, and everything to do with what was done to him before he got here. His caseworker documented it. Check your files. Whitmore did check, his mouth thinning with displeasure when he found the notation. Very well, but I'll still need to interview the oldest girl. Hazel went into the parlor where Whitmore had set up his papers, her spine straight and her mind racing. She'd talked her way through child welfare interviews before, knew the right answers, the careful balance between honesty and self-preservation. But this felt different. This felt like a trap closing around them, and she didn't know how to spring it. Whitmore gestured for her to sit, then consulted his notes with maddening slowness. Hazel Carter, age 12. You're the eldest of the siblings. Yes, sir. And you've taken on significant responsibility for your younger siblings, I understand. I've always looked after them, sir. That's what older sisters do. Even when there are capable adults present, Whitmore's pen hovered over his paper. Or has Mr. Drayton been absent in his duties? Mr. Cole provides everything we need, Hazel said carefully. Food, clothing, shelter, education. Maylin helps with daily care, but I still help my siblings because I want to, not because I have to. I see. And Mr. Drayton, does he ever make you uncomfortable, ask you to do things that feel wrong or inappropriate? The question landed like a slap. Hazel felt heat rise in her face, fury and humiliation warring in her chest. No, sir, never. You can tell me if he has. You won't get in trouble. We're here to protect you. Protect us from what? From having enough to eat? From sleeping in warm beds? From going to school and learning to read better than most adults in this territory? Hazel's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. You want to protect us? Then leave us alone. Stop trying to find problems that don't exist just because some spiteful woman doesn't like that we're happy. Whitmore's expression hardened. That's quite an accusation, young lady. It's the truth. Mrs. Halston doesn't think Mr. Cole should have us, so she's making trouble. And you're helping her do it by coming here with your questions that already assume he's done something wrong. I'm simply doing my job. Your job is supposed to be protecting children, but you're not protecting us. You're threatening the only good thing that's happened to us in years. Hazel stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Are we done, sir? Because I have chores to finish. Sit down, Miss Carter. We're not finished until I say we are. Actually, I believe we are. Cole's voice came from the doorway, cold and controlled. Unless you have specific allegations supported by evidence, I'm terminating this inspection. You've seen the house, interviewed the children, and found nothing that warrants further intrusion into our lives. Whitmore gathered his papers with sharp, angry movements. I'll be filing a comprehensive report with the county, Mr. Drayton, and I should warn you that my initial observations raise significant concerns about the appropriateness of this placement. File whatever report you like. I have receipts for every expense, documentation of medical care, school attendance records, and character references from Miss Brennan and several other community members. Unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, which you don't, your concerns will amount to exactly nothing. We'll see about that. Whitmore snapped his folder shut and stood. The county has the authority to remove children from unsuitable placements regardless of your documentation. They also have an obligation to act in the children's best interests. Taking 5 siblings who are healthy, educated, and thriving and throwing them back into the system would be the opposite of that. Any judge with sense will see it. Whitmore's smile was thin and vindictive. Judge Morrison is very concerned about moral propriety, Mr. Drayton. Very concerned indeed, especially when it involves vulnerable young girls in close proximity to unmarried men. He left with that parting shot, climbing into his wagon and driving away at a pace that suggested he couldn't wait to deliver his damning report. The moment he disappeared from view, the careful control Cole had been maintaining cracked. He slammed his fist against the doorframe with enough force to make the whole porch shake, then stood there breathing hard. His jaw clenched so tight Hazel could see the muscle jumping. Maylin materialized at his elbow, her hand on his arm. Don't, she said quietly. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you lose control. They're going to take them. Cole's voice was rough with something that might have been fear. Vera got to Whitmore somehow, convinced him we're running some kind of immoral household. And Morrison, he's traditional, conservative, values appearance over substance. If Vera makes enough noise, if she gets enough of the town behind her, then we fight. Maylin's grip tightened. We get a lawyer, we present evidence. We make them see reason. And if that doesn't work? The silence that followed was terrible. Hazel stood in the parlor doorway with her siblings clustered behind her, all of them understanding that the temporary safety they'd found was more fragile than they'd realized, that the adult world with its rules and prejudices could reach into their haven and tear it apart without caring about the damage left behind. Cole seemed to remember they were there. He turned, and the naked worry in his expression before he shuddered it away made Hazel's chest ache. This isn't over, he said, and she didn't know if he was talking to them or to himself. I won't let them take you without a fight. I promise you that. But Hazel had heard adults make promises before, and she knew how easily they broke when outside pressure became too great. The week that followed was tense with waiting, Cole made a trip to Silverton to consult with the town's only lawyer, a man named Douglas Pike, who specialized in property disputes and mining claims, but agreed to take the case. Maylin began organizing documents with systematic precision: medical records, school reports, expense ledgers that showed exactly how much Cole had invested in the children's welfare. At school, the whispers intensified. Thomas Halston spread rumors that the Carter children were about to be removed for their own protection, that everyone had been right about Cole Drayton being unsuitable. Other children began avoiding the Carters during breaks, as if whatever scandal surrounded them might be contagious. Only Miss Brennan remained steadfast. She pulled Hazel aside one afternoon after lessons and spoke in a low, urgent voice. "I want you to know that I've written a letter to Judge Morrison," she said, "documenting your progress, your behavior, the clear improvement in all of you since you've been at the ranch. I don't know if it will help, but I want you to know that you have people fighting for you." "Thank you," Hazel managed, her throat tight. "And Hazel, whatever happens, don't lose hope. I've seen children in much worse situations come through stronger. You're resilient, all of you. That counts for something." Hazel wanted to believe her, but resilience felt like cold comfort when weighed against the combined forces of prejudice, rumor, and institutional power arrayed against them. The summons came on a Friday in late March. Cole was required to appear before Judge Morrison in 2 weeks' time for a hearing regarding the suitability of his guardianship. The children would be examined by a court-appointed physician and interviewed again, this time by someone from the Territorial Welfare Office. Cole read the summons at the supper table, his face draining of color. Then he carefully folded the paper and set it aside. "All right," he said quietly. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to prepare. We're going to document everything. And we're going to walk into that courtroom with our heads high and the truth on our side." "What if the truth isn't enough?" Eli asked, his voice cracking. Cole looked at him, really looked at him, and Hazel saw the rancher make a decision. He stood, walked around the table, and did something he'd never done before. He put his hand on Eli's shoulder and squeezed. "Then we'll figure out what comes next together," Cole said. "But I'm not giving up on you without exhausting every option. You understand me? All of you. You're not disposable. You're not charity cases. You're children who deserve a home, and I'll fight like hell to make sure you keep this one." June started crying, quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks unchecked. Lily climbed into Cole's lap with the easy trust of a 4-year-old who'd never learned to doubt, and Cole held her awkwardly but gently, his expression fierce. Noah stood up from his chair and walked around the table to stand in front of Cole. He opened his mouth, worked at forming words, and finally managed a whispered sentence that carried more weight than all the legal documents in the territory. "Don't let them take us." Cole's eyes closed briefly, and when he opened them, they were suspiciously bright. "I won't, son. I promise you, I won't." It was a promise he had no guarantee he could keep, and they all knew it. But in that moment, in the lamplight of the kitchen, with the Montana wind howling outside and the warmth of the stove at their backs, it was enough to hold on to. The 2 weeks before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation and growing dread. The court-appointed physician, an elderly doctor named Ashford, who'd been practicing in the territory for 40 years, examined each child with gentle thoroughness and declared them all remarkably healthy for children who'd spent time in the county system. Well-fed, well-cared for, no signs of physical abuse or neglect, he noted in his report. The youngest girl shows some minor tooth decay that should be addressed, but that's common in children of her age and background. Overall, these children are thriving. The welfare investigator was less encouraging. She was a severe woman named Mrs. Pritchard, who seemed to find fault with everything from the fact that the girls shared a room with the boys across the hall to the amount of time the children spent doing chores. She questioned whether Maylin's presence was sufficient supervision, whether Cole's bachelor status made the arrangement inherently inappropriate, whether the children were being properly socialized or isolated on the remote ranch. "We're 15 miles from town, not on the moon," Maylin snapped at one point, her patience finally fracturing. "The children attend school 5 days a week. They interact with other children, with their teacher, with everyone necessary for proper development. What more do you want?" "I want," Mrs. Pritchard said coldly, "to ensure that these children are in a morally appropriate environment, and a household with 1 unmarried man, 1 foreign housekeeper, and 5 children of mixed ages and genders raises questions. Well, then perhaps you should question your own prejudices rather than our household, Mei Lin shot back. The investigator's report, when it came, recommended that the children be removed and placed in separate, more traditional family situations where proper moral guidance could be provided. Cole read it in the barn, away from the children, and when he emerged, his expression was carved from stone. He said nothing about the contents, but Hazel knew from the set of his shoulders that the news was bad. The night before the hearing, none of them could sleep. Hazel lay in the darkness, listening to June's quiet crying and Lily's restless tossing. Across the hall, she could hear Eli pacing, his footsteps creaking on the floorboards. Somewhere downstairs, Mei Lin was still moving around, the sounds of pots and pans suggesting she was channeling her anxiety into baking. Hazel slipped out of bed and down the stairs, drawn by the warm light of the kitchen. Mei Lin looked up from the pie crust she was rolling out, her face drawn with exhaustion. "Can't sleep either?" the housekeeper asked. Hazel shook her head and sat at the table, watching Mei Lin's capable hands work the dough. After a moment, she asked the question that had been burning in her chest. "What happens if we lose? If the judge says we have to leave?" Mei Lin's hands stilled. She set down the rolling pin and came to sit across from Hazel, her dark eyes serious. "Then Cole will appeal. And if that doesn't work, he'll fight to keep you together even if you can't stay here. He's already made arrangements with families he trusts in other territories, people who would take all 5 of you if it came to that. But not him." Hazel's voice was small. "Not with him. Not if the court rules against it, no." Mei Lin's expression was gentle but honest. "But Hazel, you need to understand something. What Cole has done, taking in 5 children, fighting this hard to keep you, that's not nothing. Even if the worst happens, even if you have to leave here, you've learned something important. You've learned that you're worth fighting for, that you deserve to be together, that there are adults in this world who will stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." "I don't want to learn lessons," Hazel whispered, her eyes burning. "I just want to stay." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Mei Lin reached across the table and took Hazel's hand. "And tomorrow, we walk into that courtroom and we tell them exactly that. We tell them what this home means, what Cole has given you, what you've built here. And we trust that somewhere in all the prejudice and politics, there's still room for common sense and compassion." Hazel wanted to believe her. But she'd spent too many years learning that the world rarely made room for common sense when it conflicted with convenient prejudice. They sat together in the kitchen until the pre-dawn light began to gray the windows, Mei Lin finishing her pies and Hazel just being present, both of them taking what comfort they could from shared silence and the small, ordinary rituals of making something sweet in the face of bitterness. When Cole came down at his usual early hour, he found them there and said nothing, just poured coffee and began his morning preparations with the same methodical calm he always showed. But Hazel noticed his hands weren't quite steady, noticed the way he kept glancing at the children as they came down for breakfast, as if memorizing them, as if afraid this might be one of the last mornings they'd all share this table. They dressed in their best clothes, the church outfits Mei Lin had insisted on back in December, now serving a different kind of sacred purpose. Cole wore a suit that looked uncomfortable on his rancher's frame, his hair slicked back, his jaw freshly shaved. He looked like a stranger, and Hazel missed the familiar comfort of his work clothes and quiet competence. The ride to Silverton was silent and tense. They took 2 wagons, Cole and the children in one, Mei Lin and their lawyer Douglas Pike in the other. Pike had coached them on what to expect, what questions might be asked, how to conduct themselves with appropriate deference to the court's authority. "Let me do most of the talking," he'd instructed. "Answer questions directly and honestly, but don't volunteer information. And whatever you do, don't let them provoke you into anger. The judge needs to see a calm, stable household, not emotional volatility." The Silverton Courthouse was a modest stone building that also served as the town hall and occasional community meeting space. A crowd had gathered outside, curious townspeople drawn by gossip, a few sympathetic faces including Miss Brennan, and in the front, practically vibrating with righteous satisfaction, Vera Halston and her collection of like-minded matrons. Cole's jaw tightened when he saw them, but he kept his eyes forward and his hands steady as he helped the children down from the wagon. Hazel felt the weight of all those stares, all that judgment, and forced herself to stand straight, to keep her chin up. Whatever happened in that courtroom, she wouldn't give Vera Halston the satisfaction of seeing her cower. They filed into the courtroom, the children sitting in the front row behind Pike and Cole, Mei Lin beside them like a small, fierce guardian. Judge Morrison entered through a side door, and everyone stood. He was older than Hazel had expected, probably in his 60s, with white hair and a face that might have been kind once but had settled into stern lines carved by years of making difficult decisions. The hearing began with opening statements. Pike spoke eloquently about Cole's character, his financial stability, the clear improvement in the children's circumstances. He presented the physician's report, Miss Brennan's letter, documentation of school attendance and academic progress, financial records showing careful provision for every need. Then it was the county's turn. Their representative, a young lawyer named Simmons, who looked like he was fresh out of law school and trying to make a name for himself, painted a picture of moral impropriety and potential danger. He cited Mrs. Pritchard's report, Whitmore's concerns, the inherent unsuitability of a bachelor household for young girls. He called Vera Halston as a witness. She took the stand with practiced righteousness, her voice quavering with false concern as she spoke about the children's welfare, about the appearance of impropriety, about her duty as a concerned citizen to speak up when she saw vulnerable children in potentially compromising situations. "I have nothing against Mr. Drayton personally," she said, her hands clasped in her lap. "But surely the court can see that this arrangement is unusual. 5 children, including 3 girls approaching womanhood, living in close quarters with an unmarried man. The potential for impropriety, whether realized or not, is simply too great to ignore." Pike cross-examined her, asking pointed questions about whether she'd ever actually witnessed any impropriety, whether she had any concrete evidence of harm. Vera deflected and hedged, falling back on vague concerns about moral standards and community values. "So what you're saying," Pike said slowly, "is that you have no actual evidence of wrongdoing, just suspicions based on your personal views about what constitutes an appropriate household." "I'm saying," Vera replied sharply, "that some situations are inappropriate on their face, regardless of whether harm has occurred yet. Prevention is better than cure, Mr. Pike." Judge Morrison called a brief recess, and during it Cole spoke to his lawyer in low, urgent tones. Pike nodded, made notes, then approached the judge's clerk with a request. When court reconvened, Pike stood and addressed the bench. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Hazel Carter to testify." Hazel's heart stopped. They'd discussed this possibility, but Pike had said it would only be used as a last resort, that putting a child on the stand was risky and emotionally fraught. The fact that he was doing it now meant he thought they were losing. She walked to the witness stand on legs that felt disconnected from her body, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The courtroom seemed enormous from this vantage point, full of faces watching her with everything from sympathy to suspicion. Pike approached her with a gentle expression. "Hazel, how old are you?" 12, sir." "And you're the oldest of the Carter siblings?" "Yes, sir." "Can you tell the court what your life was like before you came to stay with Mr. Drayton?" Hazel took a breath and began to speak. She told them about the county home with its thin soup and thinner hope, about the foster placements that treated children like unpaid labor or worse, about the constant fear and the bone-deep exhaustion of never feeling safe. She told them about standing on that auction platform and making the decision to keep her family together no matter what. "And what has your life been like at the Broken Pine Ranch?" Pike asked. "Different," Hazel said simply. "We have enough food, we sleep in warm beds, we go to school. We do chores, but they're fair chores, teaching us useful things, not just using us for free labor. Mr. Cole is quiet and he's not warm, I guess, but he's steady. He keeps his promises. He gives us space, but he's there when we need him. And Mei Lin," her voice wavered slightly, "Mei Lin makes it feel like home. Has Mr. Drayton ever done anything inappropriate? Ever made you uncomfortable in any way?" "No, sir, never. He barely even touches us, like he's afraid we'll break or something. The most he ever does is put a hand on our shoulder when we're upset, and even that seems hard for him." Pike nodded. "And if the court were to rule that you had to leave the ranch, what would that mean for you and your siblings?" Hazel looked directly at Judge Morrison, willing him to understand. "It would mean we'd get split up, because nobody wants 5 kids. They'll take 1, maybe 2 if they're desperate for workers. but not all 5. So June would go one place, Eli somewhere else, Noah and Lily to different families. We'd lose each other. And that's worse than anything else that could happen. Even worse than staying in an allegedly inappropriate household. There's nothing inappropriate about our household, Hazel said, her voice strengthening. The only thing inappropriate is people looking at kindness and seeing something dirty. Mr. Cole gave us a chance to stay together when nobody else would. That's not wrong. That's the most right thing anyone's ever done for us. Pike smiled slightly. Thank you, Hazel. No further questions. Simmons stood for cross-examination, and Hazel braced herself. But before he could speak, there was a commotion at the back of the courtroom. The doors opened, and Eli walked forward, his face set with determination. I want to testify, he said loudly. I'm old enough. I have things to say. Judge Morrison frowned. Young man, this isn't how— Please, Your Honor. Eli's voice cracked but didn't break. I need to say this. For my family. The judge studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. Approach the bench. Eli was sworn in and took the witness stand, his hands gripping the rail so tight his knuckles went white. Pike started to ask a question, but Eli spoke over him. I hated Mr. Cole when we first got to the ranch, he said bluntly. I thought he was like all the others, that he'd use us and hurt us and throw us away when he got tired of the trouble. I waited for it. Every day, I waited for him to show his real self. The courtroom was silent, hanging on his words. But he never did. He just kept being steady, kept showing up, doing the work, keeping his promises. When I snapped at him, he didn't hit me. When I messed up chores, he showed me how to do better instead of punishing me. When I had nightmares and woke everyone up, he didn't complain. Eli's voice wavered. He just let me be broken and didn't make me feel bad about it. He looked directly at Vera Halston, his young face hard with accusation. You want to know what's inappropriate, Mrs. Halston? It's this. It's you trying to destroy the only good thing that's happened to us because it doesn't fit your idea of what a family should look like. It's you caring more about appearances than about whether we're actually safe and happy. That's what's inappropriate. Young man, Judge Morrison said warningly, but there was something in his expression that suggested he wasn't entirely unsympathetic. Eli turned to the judge. We're not perfect. Maybe our household isn't traditional, but we're together and we're safe, and we're learning that the world doesn't have to be a terrible place all the time. Isn't that what matters? Isn't that more important than whether we have the right kind of family? He stepped down from the witness stand without being dismissed, and Judge Morrison didn't stop him. Eli walked back to his seat, and Noah reached out and took his hand. And then Noah stood up. The tiny 6-year-old walked to the front of the courtroom with his shoulders squared, and everyone watched in stunned silence. He climbed onto the witness stand chair, too small to reach any other way, and faced the judge. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, but in the absolute silence of the courtroom, every word carried. I stopped talking because a man hurt me. He said if I ever told anyone, he'd hurt me worse. So I stopped. I stopped for months. Noah's small hands twisted together. But Mr. Cole made it safe to have a voice again. He never pushed. He never got mad that I was quiet. He just waited until I was ready. And Maylin, she listens even when I don't talk. She knows what I need. His eyes filled with tears, but he kept going. Please don't send us away. Please. This is home. It's the first real home we've ever had. We're not wrong for wanting to keep it. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Morrison removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes, suddenly looking every one of his 60-some years. He replaced the glasses and surveyed the courtroom, his gaze moving from the children to Cole to Maylin to Vera Halston and her disapproving circle. This court will recess for deliberation, he said finally. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. The next half hour was excruciating. They waited in a side room Pike had secured, the children clustered together on a bench, Cole pacing like a caged animal, Maylin maintaining her composure through sheer force of will. Nobody spoke. There was nothing left to say. They'd put everything on the line, exposed all their wounds and hopes to public scrutiny, and now all they could do was wait. When the clerk finally appeared at the door and told them the judge was ready, Hazel felt her stomach drop. Cole's face had gone pale beneath his tan, and even Mei Lin's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down her skirt. They filed back into the courtroom in silence, every step feeling like walking toward a cliff edge in fog, unable to see what waited below. Judge Morrison was already seated, his expression unreadable. The courtroom had filled during the recess, more townspeople crowding into the gallery as word spread that a decision was imminent. Hazel could feel their collective attention like a physical weight, all those eyes watching to see if 5 unwanted children would be sent back into the system or allowed to keep the home they'd fought so hard for. The judge cleared his throat, and the murmuring in the gallery ceased. This court has heard testimony regarding the custody arrangement of the 5 Carter children currently residing with Mr. Cole Drayton at the Broken Pine Ranch. I've reviewed the reports from Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Pritchard, and Dr. Ashford. I've considered the concerns raised by Mrs. Halston and other community members, and I've heard directly from the children themselves, which I must say was both illuminating and deeply affecting. He paused, shuffling papers on his bench. Hazel's fingernails dug into her palms hard enough to leave marks. The question before this court is not whether Mr. Drayton's household conforms to traditional family structures. Clearly, it does not. The question is whether this arrangement serves the best interests of these 5 children, and whether there is any evidence of actual harm or impropriety that would justify removal. Morrison's gaze swept across the courtroom, landing on Vera Halston with something that might have been reproach. I'm troubled by the nature of this complaint. I'm troubled that it seems motivated more by personal disapproval of unconventional arrangements than by genuine concern for child welfare. And I'm troubled by the implication that a bachelor man who chooses to provide for orphaned children must necessarily have sinister motives. He let that settle for a moment. Such thinking does disservice both to Mr. Drayton and to the many children in this territory who desperately need homes but are denied them because potential guardians fear exactly this kind of judgment and scrutiny. Vera's face flushed red, but she pressed her lips together and said nothing. That being said, Morrison continued, and Hazel's brief flare of hope guttered, this court does have a responsibility to ensure proper supervision and moral guidance for minor children, particularly young girls approaching adolescence. And while I find no evidence of current impropriety, I cannot in good conscience ignore the potential for future complications in a household where teenage girls are supervised by an unmarried man, regardless of how honorable that man may be. The words hit like blows. Cole's hands clenched on the table in front of him. Pike started to rise, probably to object, but Morrison held up a hand. Therefore, this court will allow the current custody arrangement to continue under the following conditions. He paused, and the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. First, Mrs. Mei Lin Zhang will be formally recognized as co-guardian and primary household supervisor with full authority over the children's daily care and welfare. Her presence and oversight addresses the supervision concerns raised by the county. Mei Lin's sharp intake of breath was audible. Cole turned to look at her, surprise and something like relief breaking through his controlled expression. Second, Mr. Drayton will petition this court for formal adoption of all 5 Carter children within 6 months. Legal adoption will provide clearer protections and responsibilities than the current custody arrangement and will demonstrate Mr. Drayton's genuine commitment to these children's long-term welfare. Morrison's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Third, the children will continue regular school attendance and will be subject to annual welfare checks by the county, though I will personally oversee the assignment of inspectors to ensure future visits are conducted with appropriate professionalism and without predetermined bias. He looked directly at Whitmore, who had the grace to appear uncomfortable. Fourth and finally, Mrs. Halston and any other concerned citizens are hereby ordered to cease harassment of the Drayton household. This includes, but is not limited to, spreading unfounded rumors, encouraging boycotts or social ostracism, and filing frivolous complaints with county offices. Any further interference will be considered contempt of this court's ruling. Vera half rose from her seat, her face mottled with fury. Your Honor, I must protest. You may protest all you like, Mrs. Halston, but you will do so outside my courtroom and away from these children. This hearing is concluded. Morrison brought his gavel down with sharp finality. The custody arrangement stands. Mr. Drayton, Mrs. Zhang, You will report to my clerk to complete the necessary paperwork for the adoption petition and co-guardianship documentation. Court is adjourned." For a moment, nobody moved. Then June made a small, choked sound that was half laugh, half sob. Lily launched herself at Cole with enough force to nearly knock him over, wrapping her small arms around his waist. Eli's shoulders shook as he bent over, hands braced on his knees, breathing hard with relief. Noah grabbed Hazel's hand and squeezed it so tight it hurt. Hazel looked at Cole and saw her own overwhelming emotion reflected in his face. The shock of reprieve, the weight of responsibility renewed, the fierce protectiveness that came with knowing they'd been given another chance. His eyes met hers across the space between them, and she saw him mouth two words. "We won." Mei Lin was already moving toward the clerk's desk, her practical nature asserting itself even in this moment of victory. But Hazel saw the way the housekeeper's hands trembled as she gathered her skirts, saw the brightness in her eyes that spoke of tears held back through sheer determination. Pike was shaking Cole's hand, speaking rapidly about next steps and paperwork and legal procedures. But Cole seemed barely able to focus. He lifted Lily into his arms with the same awkwardness he always showed with physical affection. But there was tenderness in the gesture now, a visible letting go of some barrier he'd maintained between himself and the children. The crowd in the gallery was dispersing, some people looking pleased, others disappointed. Vera Halston swept out with her coterie of disapproving matrons, her spine rigid with outrage. But Miss Brennan pushed through to reach them, her face bright with genuine joy. "I knew it," she said, gripping Hazel's hands. "I knew Morrison would see sense. He's a good man beneath all that stern propriety." "Thank you," Hazel managed. "For the letter, for everything." "You fought for yourselves," Miss Brennan said firmly. "All I did was tell the truth. The fighting, that was all you." Outside the courthouse, the spring sunshine felt like benediction. The snow had melted from all but the most shadowed places, and there were green shoots visible in the sheltered spots where grass was beginning to reclaim the mud-churned streets. It felt like the world itself was celebrating their victory, offering them the promise of renewal and growth. They loaded back into the wagons, but this time the silence was buoyant rather than tense. Lily chattered about how she'd been scared of the judge, but he'd turned out to be nice, and how she was going to draw him a picture of Orange the cat as a thank you present. June sat pressed against Hazel's side, occasionally hiccuping with residual emotion. Eli sprawled in the wagon bed with his face turned up to the sun, looking younger than he had in months. Noah sat in the front seat next to Cole again, and when they were a few miles outside of town, he spoke in his tentative whisper. "Are we really staying for real this time?" Cole's hands tightened on the reins, but his voice was steady. "For real this time. Not just staying, becoming family, official and legal, the kind nobody can take away." "What's adoption mean exactly?" Noah asked, the words coming slightly easier now that he'd broken the seal on his silence. "Means you're mine," Cole said simply. "All of you. Permanently. Means your last name becomes Drayton if you want it. Means even if something happened to me, there'd be provisions in place to keep you together, keep you secure. Means no more auctions, no more county homes, no more wondering if you have a place in this world." "Do we have to take your name?" Eli asked from the back, his voice carefully neutral. "We're Carters. That's who we've always been." Cole glanced back at him. "You can keep Carter if you want, or you can hyphenate, Carter Drayton, or you can choose something else entirely. The point isn't the name. The point is the legal protection and the permanence." "I want to be a Drayton," Lily announced. "Lily Drayton sounds pretty." "I think I'd like Carter Drayton," June said softly. "So we don't lose Mama, but we still have you." Hazel considered this, rolling the possibilities around in her mind. "What about you, Mei Lin? You're going to be our co-guardian. Do we call you something different now?" Mei Lin turned from where she sat in the second wagon, driven by Pike, who was humming tunelessly. "You call me what you've always called me. I'm Mei Lin, or Auntie May, if you prefer. The paperwork doesn't change who we are to each other. It just makes it official." "Official sounds good," Eli said, and there was less suspicion in his voice than there had been in months. "Official means harder to undo." "Considerably harder," Pike called out cheerfully. "Once that adoption is finalized, you'd need an act of territorial legislature to reverse it. or proof of serious abuse, which clearly isn't a factor here.
Boise?
They reached the ranch as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and rose gold. The buildings looked solid and welcoming, the barn doors standing open, smoke rising from the kitchen chimney where Mei Lin had left bread rising before they departed that morning. Cole helped the children down from the wagon, and Mei Lin immediately began organizing everyone for evening chores despite the emotional exhaustion of the day. "Cows don't care about court proceedings," she said briskly. "They still need milking, chickens still need feeding. Life goes on, and ranch work doesn't pause for human drama." But there was warmth in her voice, and when Hazel moved to help with the kitchen work, Mei Lin pulled her into a brief, fierce hug that spoke volumes more than words could. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt fundamentally different from before. The legal victory had lifted a weight none of them had fully acknowledged carrying, and the house seemed lighter for it. Even Cole, who had never been demonstrative, seemed to relax incrementally, his rare smiles coming slightly more easily, his tolerance for noise and chaos increasing by barely perceptible degrees. The adoption paperwork required multiple trips to town, meetings with Judge Morrison's clerk, affidavits from character witnesses, and financial disclosures proving Cole's ability to provide for 5 children long-term. Douglas Pike handled most of the legal complexity, but Morrison had insisted on interviewing each child individually one more time, not to question their placement, but to ensure they understood what adoption meant and agreed to it freely. These interviews were conducted in Morrison's chambers rather than the formal courtroom, in comfortable chairs with tea and cookies provided by the judge's stern but kind secretary. Morrison asked each child if they wanted to be adopted, if they understood it was permanent, if they had any concerns or fears they wanted to voice. When it was Hazel's turn, she sat across from the white-haired judge and met his eyes directly. "Do you have reservations about the adoption, Hazel?" Morrison asked gently. "No, sir. I want it. We all do. Even though it means legally binding yourself to a man you've only known for a few months? Even though you're old enough to understand that permanent means you can't change your mind if things get difficult?" Hazel thought about this, wanting to give him an honest answer rather than just the one she thought he wanted to hear. "I've learned that nothing in life is really permanent, Your Honor. People die, circumstances change, promises get broken. But I also learned that some things are worth committing to even knowing they might not last forever. Mr. Cole has shown us what it means to be chosen on purpose, not just taken in out of obligation. That's worth making permanent, as much as anything in this world can be." Morrison's expression softened, the stern lines of his face rearranging into something almost grandfatherly. "You're wise beyond your years, child. Too wise, perhaps, for one so young. I hope the years ahead let you be more of a child and less of a survivor." "I hope so too, sir." "For what it's worth," Morrison added, "I think Cole Drayton is fortunate to have you, all of you. A man can build a ranch and amass property and achieve all manner of worldly success, but building a family, that's the harder work, and the more important one." When all the interviews were complete and all the paperwork filed, Morrison set the final adoption hearing for the last week of April. Unlike the custody hearing, this would be a formality, a legal recognition of what had already become true in daily practice. But Mei Lin insisted they treat it with appropriate ceremony. "You get one chance at an adoption day," she said firmly. "We're going to do it properly." She commissioned new outfits from the dressmaker in town, Sunday best for each child, carefully fitted and made from fabric nice enough to last for years, but practical enough for Montana life. Cole protested the expense, but Mei Lin overruled him with the kind of quiet authority that had become her trademark. "These children have never had anything new made just for them," she said. "Never had the experience of being measured and fitted and fussed over like they matter. You'll pay for the clothes and you won't complain about it." Cole paid for the clothes. The night before the adoption hearing, Mei Lin made a feast: roasted chicken and potatoes, fresh bread, vegetables from the root cellar, and a cake with actual frosting that must have taken her hours to prepare. They ate at the long table that had witnessed so many meals, so many small moments of becoming a family, without quite having the legal standing to call themselves one. After supper, when the dishes were cleared and the younger children were occupied with a game of checkers, Cole stood at the head of the table and cleared his throat awkwardly. "I'm not good at speeches," he began, his discomfort evident. Most of you know that about me by now. I'm better with horses than people, better with silence than words. But tonight feels like it requires words, so I'm going to stumble through them as best I can. Hazel set down the dish towel she'd been using and gave him her full attention. Eli looked up from the checkerboard, June closed her book, and even Lily stopped chattering to listen. 6 months ago, I went to that auction platform thinking I might take on one child, maybe two if they were old enough to genuinely help with ranch work. I wasn't looking for a family. I was looking for… Honestly, I don't know what I was looking for. Some way to pay forward the chance I'd been given years ago, maybe. Some way to feel less alone in this big empty house without having to actually deal with people. He paused, his hands gripping the back of his chair. And then I saw 5 kids refusing to be separated. And something in that stubbornness spoke to me, made me remember what it felt like to be powerless and desperate and still fighting for the only thing that mattered. So I brought you home, and I told myself it was temporary, that I'd get you settled and then help you find proper families when the time came. But we are a proper family, June protested softly. Cole's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile. Yes, you are. That's what I'm trying to say. Somewhere between that first snow and Noah finding his voice again, between Eli learning to gentle horses and Hazel learning she didn't have to fight every battle alone, between June's endless reading and Lily's constant songs, you became mine. Not in an ownership way, in a belonging way. The kind that goes both directions. He looked at Mei Lin, who was watching him with suspiciously bright eyes. And Mei Lin has been the steady foundation of all of it, the one who knew how to turn a house into a home, who understood what these children needed when I was still figuring out basic things like how much food growing kids actually consume. Considerable amounts, Mei Lin said dryly, but her voice wavered slightly. Tomorrow makes it official, Cole continued. Tomorrow a judge signs papers and you become Draytons, or Carter Draytons, or whatever combination you've settled on. But I want you to know that the paper isn't what makes you my children. You were my children the moment you climbed into that wagon and trusted me enough to come home with a stranger. Tomorrow just makes it so the world has to recognize what's already true. The silence that followed was thick with emotion. Then Noah stood up from the checkerboard and walked to Cole with the deliberate purpose that characterized all his movements now that he was finding his voice. He wrapped his small arms around Cole's waist and pressed his face against the rancher's shirt. "You're my dad," he said clearly, the words no longer whispered but spoken with conviction. "Not just Mr. Cole. Dad." Cole's arms came around the boy slowly, as if he was still learning the motion, still afraid of doing it wrong. But there was nothing wrong in the way he held Noah, nothing uncertain about the fierceness with which he pressed his cheek against the top of the child's head. "Yeah, son," Cole said roughly. "I'm your dad." And just like that, the last barrier fell. Lily launched herself at them both, then June, then Hazel, until Cole was surrounded by children all trying to hug him at once. Even Eli, who held himself apart from physical affection more than the others, moved close enough to grip Cole's shoulder with one hand. Mei Lin watched this tableau from the kitchen doorway, her hand pressed against her mouth, tears streaming openly down her face for the first time since Hazel had known her. When Cole looked up and met her eyes over the children's heads, something passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, shared purpose. "Come here, Auntie May," Lily demanded, and Mei Lin moved into the circle, her small frame fitting perfectly into the spaces between them all. They stood like that for a long time, a knot of humanity held together by choice and effort and the daily work of showing up for each other. It wasn't perfect. Perfection wasn't possible with this many people all carrying their own wounds and histories. But it was real, and it was theirs, and tomorrow it would be permanent. The adoption hearing the next day was everything the custody hearing hadn't been. Brief, joyful, and entirely ceremonial. Judge Morrison signed the papers with a flourish, congratulated the new Drayton family, and suggested they celebrate with ice cream at the pharmacy's soda fountain. They took his advice. The 7 of them, Cole, Mei Lin, and 5 children who were now legally and irrevocably siblings, crowding into the pharmacy and ordering enough ice cream to scandalize the proprietor. The townspeople who witnessed this spectacle had mixed reactions. Some smiled and nodded, recognizing that Morrison's ruling had settled the matter regardless of their personal opinions. Others turned away with pursed lips, unwilling to approve but also unwilling to openly defy the judge's clear position. And a few, Miss Brennan, the doctor, a handful of ranchers who'd known Cole for years, stopped by their table to offer congratulations and welcome the children officially into the community. Vera Halston was notably absent, though Hazel spotted her through the pharmacy window, watching from across the street with an expression of bitter defeat. Hazel met her eyes deliberately, lifted her ice cream spoon in a gesture that was half salute and half dismissal, and then turned her back. Vera could watch them be happy. It wouldn't change anything. The ride home that afternoon felt different from every other return to the ranch. This time, they weren't guests or wards or temporary placements. They were family, going home to the place that belonged to them as much as they belonged to it. As they crested the last rise before the ranch came into view, Eli spoke up from the wagon bed. "Stop the wagon a minute?" Cole pulled to a halt, surprise evident in the set of his shoulders. "Something wrong?" "No, just want to look at it." Eli climbed to his feet, steadying himself on the wagon's side rail, and gazed out at the broken pine ranch spread below them. "Want to remember what it looks like this exact moment. Our first day coming home is Drayton's." One by one, they all stood, even Lily, wobbling slightly until June steadied her. 7 people standing in a wagon on a Montana hillside in late April, looking down at buildings and land that represented everything they'd fought for, everything they'd nearly lost, everything they'd been given the chance to keep. The ranch looked the same as always, weathered wood and practical construction, nothing fancy or decorated, just solid and enduring. But it looked different too, through eyes that could finally see it without the constant fear of impermanence, without the voice in the back of the mind whispering that this too would be taken away. "It's not much to look at," Cole said quietly. "Not like those big painted houses in town, or the ranches with carved porches and glass windows." "It's perfect," Hazel said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "It's exactly perfect." June pulled out the small journal she'd taken to carrying everywhere and made a quick sketch, rough lines capturing the shape of the barn, the house, the distant mountains. Underneath, she wrote the date and a single sentence: "The day we came home forever." Cole set the wagon moving again, and they descended the hill toward the life that waited for them. Chores and lessons, meals and arguments, the ordinary sacred work of being a family. Orange the cat met them in the yard, winding between their legs with indiscriminate affection. The chickens squawked their usual complaints about feeding times. The horses whickered from the barn, recognizing the sound of the wagon. Everything was exactly as they'd left it that morning, and everything was completely transformed. That night, after chores and supper, and the evening routines that had become comfortable habit, after the younger children had been tucked into bed and the house had settled into quiet, Hazel found herself unable to sleep. She slipped downstairs in her nightgown and found Cole sitting on the front porch, a cup of coffee going cold in his hands as he stared out at the starlit darkness. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly. He shifted to make room for her on the porch step. "Too much in my head." Hazel sat beside him, tucking her nightgown around her knees against the cool night air. "Good thoughts or worried thoughts?" "Both, maybe. Thinking about responsibility. About 5 lives depending on me not to mess this up." "You won't mess it up." Cole's laugh was dry. "You don't know that. I don't know the first thing about raising children. I know ranching and solitude and how to survive hard winters. I don't know how to help June when she has nightmares, or what to do if Eli's anger comes back, or how to keep Noah talking now that he's started." "You don't have to know everything," Hazel said. "You just have to keep showing up. That's all any of us need. Someone who shows up day after day, even when it's hard, even when we're difficult or scared or angry. You've already proven you can do that." "What if it's not enough?" Hazel thought about this, choosing her words carefully. "I spent 2 years watching adults fail us in different ways. Some of them meant well but couldn't handle the reality of how much work we were. Some of them had ulterior motives from the start. Some of them were just absent, even when they were physically present. You're none of those things. You're steady and honest, and you keep your promises. That's already more than enough." Cole was quiet for a long moment, his coffee cup held loosely between his hands. "Your mother, what was she like?" The question surprised Hazel. tired, mostly. She loved us, but life wore her down. Our father drank, couldn't keep work, and she carried all of us alone even before he left. When she got sick, I think part of her was relieved, like she could finally stop fighting. That must have been hard to watch. It was, but it taught me something important. Hazel looked up at the stars, brilliant in the clear Montana sky. It taught me that love isn't always enough if you're fighting everything alone. That's why this matters so much. You and Mei Lin, you're not doing it alone. You have each other, and you have us helping however we can. That makes it sustainable in a way it never was for Mama. Cole's hand moved almost unconsciously to rest briefly on top of Hazel's head, an awkward pat that was his version of comfort. You're too wise for 12, you know that? I've heard that before. I'll try to be more foolish in the future. That startled a genuine laugh out of him, rusty from disuse, but real. Don't you dare. Your wisdom is one of the things keeping this family afloat. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen around them. From inside the house came a small sound, Noah crying out in his sleep, then Mei Lin's soothing voice, then silence again as she settled him back down. The sounds of family, of people taking care of each other in the dark hours. Thank you, Cole said finally, for giving me a chance, for trusting me enough to stay when you could have run, for fighting for this family when it would have been easier to give up. Thank you for being worth the trust, Hazel replied. And for the record, we didn't give you a chance. You gave us one. We're just returning the favor by sticking around and making your life complicated. Complicated, Cole agreed, but there was warmth in his voice that hadn't been there 6 months ago. That's one word for it. He stood, offering his hand to help Hazel up. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we've got a full day of work, and Mei Lin will have our hides if we're dragging from lack of rest. Hazel took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. But before going back inside, she turned and hugged him properly. Not the desperate clutching of fear or relief, but the simple affection of a daughter for her father. Cole stiffened in surprise, then his arms came around her carefully, returning the embrace with the hesitant tenderness of someone still learning this language of family. Good night, Dad, Hazel whispered. Cole's breath caught, and his arms tightened fractionally. Good night, daughter. They went inside together, locking the door against the night, securing the warmth and light and life they'd built within these walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new moments of doubt and difficulty. But tonight, in this moment, they had everything that mattered. They had each other, officially and permanently. They had a home that was theirs by law and by love. They had a future that stretched out before them with possibilities instead of dead ends. And they had the knowledge, hard-won and daily proven, that family wasn't defined by blood or tradition or what other people thought was proper. It was defined by choice, by showing up, by the daily work of caring for each other even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Upstairs, June mumbled in her sleep and reached out to find Lily's warm little body beside her. Across the hall, Eli sprawled across his bed with one arm hanging off the side, finally relaxed enough to sleep without vigilance. Noah curled tight as a fist, with Orange the cat purring on his pillow, and Hazel climbed back into the trundle bed, pulled the quilt, made by Mei Lin's patient hands during long winter evenings, up to her chin, and let herself believe in permanence. Not because the world had suddenly become safe or fair or kind, but because she'd learned that even in an unsafe, unfair, unkind world, there were pockets of grace. Places where stubborn ranchers took in too many children and fierce housekeepers transformed houses into homes. Places where silence could be respected, anger could be gentled, and 5 unwanted kids could become 5 chosen children. Places like the Broken Pine Ranch, where broken things came to heal and families were built from the scraps the world had discarded. She fell asleep to the sound of the wind in the pines and the quiet sounds of her family breathing in the darkness. Each exhale proof that they'd survived another day. Each inhale promise that there would be more days ahead. Together. Spring transformed into summer with the kind of generous warmth that made Montana winters feel like distant memory. The ranch bloomed into productivity, calves born healthy and strong, garden rows bursting with vegetables under Mei Lin's careful tending. The children brown from sun and growing so fast Cole complained about the expense of new boots every few months. But growth wasn't only physical, It showed in the way Eli now rode out with Cole to check fence lines without being asked, the two of them returning hours later with easy silence between them that spoke of comfort rather than distance. It showed in June's expanding collection of stories, scribbled in journals Cole kept buying her, even though she protested the expense. It showed in Lily's fearless exploration of every corner of the ranch, her constant chatter now including full sentences about her family and her home, without the hesitation of a child expecting to be moved at any moment. And it showed in Noah, whose voice grew stronger each week. He'd never be a chatterbox like Lily, but he spoke when he had something to say, asked questions when he was curious, and most importantly, called Cole Dad, with the casual ease of a child who'd never doubted his place. The town's attitude shifted slowly but perceptibly. The adoption had established legitimacy in a way that temporary custody never could, and even the most skeptical townspeople had to acknowledge that the Drayton children appeared healthy, well-educated, and notably happier than most of the other students at the schoolhouse. Miss Brennan reported that Hazel and June were among her top students, that Eli's initial hostility had mellowed into quiet competence, and that Noah, despite his continued preference for silence in public, completed all his work with careful attention. Vera Halston maintained her disapproval, but Judge Morrison's warning had teeth, and she'd learned to keep her opinions confined to her own parlor rather than spreading them through official channels. The snubs she organized, excluding the Drayton children from certain social events, encouraging her friends to do likewise, were petty annoyances rather than serious threats. "Let her have her small victories," Maylin said when Lily came home in tears because she hadn't been invited to a birthday party that apparently included every other girl her age. "Women like that need someone to look down on to feel important. Better us than someone more vulnerable." But Cole's expression, when he heard about the snub, was dark enough that Hazel privately thought Vera Halston should be grateful she rarely ventured near the Broken Pine Ranch. Summer also brought ranch hands. Cole hired 2 men for the season, grizzled cowboys named Pete and Santiago, who'd worked various Montana ranches for decades and treated the presence of children with weathered indifference. They bunked in the renovated bunkhouse, took their meals separately, and interacted with the family primarily through work. Eli attached himself to them with the determination of a boy starved for masculine attention beyond Cole's quiet presence. Pete taught him to rope properly, while Santiago showed him the finer points of reading cattle behavior. Both men treated Eli with the casual respect they'd offer any ranch hand learning the trade, and under their tutelage, Eli's natural anger found outlet in hard physical work and genuine skill development. "Boys got good instincts," Pete observed to Cole one evening while Hazel was in the barn helping with evening chores. "Shame to waste them. He keeps at it. He could make a real hand someday." "That's his choice to make," Cole said. I'm not raising ranch hands. I'm raising children who get to choose what they become." Pete spat tobacco juice and shrugged. "Fair enough. But the offer stands if he wants it. I know a few ranchers looking for competent help, and a recommendation from me counts for something." Hazel, listening from the tack room where she'd been sorting through halters, felt warmth spread through her chest. Not just because Pete recognized Eli's potential, but because Cole had made it clear that potential was an obligation, that his children's futures were their own to shape. The first real test of their transformed family came in August, when a letter arrived from the Territorial Welfare Office. Hazel saw it first when she collected the mail from the post-rider, and her stomach clenched at the official seal. She carried it to Cole with hands that wanted to tremble, remembering too well what official correspondence had meant in the past. Cole opened it at the kitchen table while Maylin stood at his shoulder, both of them reading with expressions that made Hazel's anxiety spike. Then Cole's mouth twitched into something that might have been amusement. "It's the annual welfare check," he said, handing the letter to Hazel. "Morrison's keeping his word about oversight, but he's assigned Dr. Ashford to conduct it instead of sending Whitmore or his ilk. We're to expect him next Tuesday." Relief made Hazel's knees weak. Dr. Ashford had been kind during the custody hearing, and his report had been one of the things that swayed Morrison's decision. This wasn't an attack. It was exactly what Morrison had promised, appropriate supervision without predetermined bias. Dr. Ashford arrived on the specified Tuesday driving his own buggy, his medical bag on the seat beside him. He was a comfortable-looking man in his 60s, with the kind of face that inspired trust in a manner that put even nervous children at ease. He examined each child with gentle thoroughness, checking teeth and eyes and reflexes, asking questions about diet and sleep, and whether they'd had any illnesses since his last examination. Growing like weeds, all of them, he announced to Cole and Mei Lin after finishing his examinations. Noah's put on at least 8 pounds since I saw him last spring, and the girls are all showing healthy development. Eli's got some muscle mass that suggests hard work, but not the kind of overwork that damages growing bones. Overall, I'd say these children are thriving. He made notes in his ledger, then looked up with shrewd eyes. I'm also required to assess emotional and educational development. How are they doing in school, Miss Brennan's reports notwithstanding? Mei Lin produced the children's recent schoolwork, arithmetic problems solved correctly, essays written with improving penmanship, drawings and projects that showed engagement with learning. Ashford reviewed them with the same care he'd applied to the physical examinations. And socially? Are they making friends, integrating into the community? Some, Hazel answered honestly when Cole and Mei Lin looked uncertain. We're not the most popular family in town, but we have friends. Miss Brennan, obviously. And some of the other students who don't care what their parents think. It's enough. Ashford's expression softened. Being well-liked and being well-adjusted aren't the same thing. The former depends on others' prejudices. The latter depends on having a stable foundation and genuine care. From what I can see, you have both those things here. He closed his ledger with finality. I'll file a report stating that the Drayton household continues to provide excellent care for all 5 children, that they show clear signs of healthy development both physically and emotionally, and that I recommend no changes to the current arrangement. Judge Morrison will be pleased to hear it. After he left, the family gathered in the kitchen for the celebratory pie Mei Lin had made despite not knowing the outcome. It was becoming a tradition, facing hard things together, then marking survival with something sweet. 1 year down, Cole said, cutting generous slices. Many more to go. How many more? Lily asked, licking frosting from her fingers. Forever? Until you're all grown and making your own choices about where to live and what to do, Cole said, which hopefully is a very long time from now, because I'm just getting used to having you around. We're not leaving, June said firmly. Even when we're grown, this is home. You might feel different when you're older, Mei Lin cautioned gently. The world is big, and you might want to see parts of it that aren't Montana ranch country. Then we'll see them and come back, Eli said with the certainty of an 11-year-old who'd found his place and couldn't imagine willingly leaving it. Doesn't mean we stop belonging here. Hazel caught Cole's eye across the table and saw her own emotion reflected there, the fierce hope that Eli was right, that they were building something strong enough to withstand the inevitable changes of growing up, but also the knowledge that love sometimes meant letting go when the time came. But that time was years away yet. For now they had summer afternoons and evening chores, had reading lessons and writing lessons, had Mei Lin's sharp tongue and Cole's quiet presence, and the daily proof that they were wanted, chosen, kept. The second test came from an unexpected direction. In late September, as the first hints of autumn began coloring the high country, a woman arrived at the ranch driving a wagon with 2 horses that had clearly seen better days. She was thin to the point of gauntness, probably in her late 30s, with brown hair streaked with premature gray and eyes that held the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. She climbed down from the wagon with visible effort and stood in the yard looking around with an expression Hazel couldn't quite read. When Cole emerged from the barn to greet her, she straightened her shoulders as if preparing for battle. Mr. Drayton, I'm Clara Bennett. I believe you have my niece and nephews living with you. The words fell like stones into still water. Hazel, who'd been sweeping the porch, froze. Inside the house, she could hear Mei Lin's sharp intake of breath through the open window. Cole's expression didn't change, but Hazel had learned to read his stillness. I have 5 adopted children, if that's what you mean. Their last name is Drayton now. Carter was my sister's name. My married sister. Clara Bennett's voice shook slightly. I've been looking for the children since Mary died. The county told me they'd been placed in foster care, but they couldn't tell me where. I've spent months tracking them down. Looking for them, Cole repeated, his voice flat. For what purpose? To take them home, of course. They're family. They belong with family. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Hazel gripped the broom handle hard enough to hurt, trying to process what she was hearing. An aunt. They had an aunt who wanted them, who'd been looking for them. Mei Lin appeared in the doorway, her face pale but composed. "Perhaps you should come inside, Mrs. Bennet. This conversation requires more than a dusty yard." They gathered in the parlor, Cole and Mei Lin on one side, Clara Bennet on the other, and Hazel standing in the doorway because she couldn't make herself sit down, couldn't make herself leave. The other children were still outside doing chores, unaware that their world was potentially about to shift again. Clara accepted tea from Mei Lin with trembling hands and began to speak, her words tumbling out in a rush as if she'd been holding them back too long. "Mary was my younger sister. She married John Carter against our parents' wishes. He was charming but unreliable. Everyone could see it except her. They had the children quickly, one after another, and Mary wrote to me about how hard things were, how John drank and couldn't keep work. I sent money when I could, but I was barely surviving myself. My husband died in a mining accident, left me with debts and no way to pay them." She set down the teacup with shaking hands. "When Mary wrote that she was sick, I tried to get to her, but I was 3 territories away, and by the time I sold what little I had and made arrangements, she was already gone. The county had taken the children, and John had disappeared. They told me the children had been placed in foster care, but they couldn't release information about where. Said it was policy." "So you gave up," Cole said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "I didn't give up." Clara's voice rose, defensive. "I spent everything I had trying to find them. I wrote to every county office in Montana Territory, every orphanage and children's home. Most didn't respond. Those that did said they couldn't help without proper documentation. It took me 6 months just to get copies of Mary's death certificate and proof of my relationship to the children." She pulled papers from her bag with shaking hands, legal documents, letters, a worn photograph of a woman who looked eerily like an older version of June. "By the time I had the paperwork and found out they'd been auctioned to you, they'd already been adopted. The county clerk told me there was nothing I could do, that adoption superseded blood relation. But I had to come anyway. I had to see them, make sure they were all right." Cole took the papers and examined them with careful attention. Mei Lin moved to read over his shoulder, and Hazel saw her expression shift into something complicated. Sympathy warring with protectiveness. "These documents appear legitimate," Cole said finally. "You are indeed Mary Carter's sister, and by law you would have had a claim to custody before the adoption was finalized. But as you noted, the adoption has been finalized, which means legally you have no claim now." "I know that." Clara's voice broke. "I know I failed them by not being faster, not being better organized, not being the kind of person who could cut through bureaucracy. But they're still my blood, Mary's children, and I need to know they're safe, that they're happy, that Mary didn't die thinking her babies would be raised by strangers." Hazel stepped fully into the room, her heart pounding. "Your Aunt Clara. Mama mentioned you sometimes. You sent us a doll once for June's birthday." Clara's head snapped up, her eyes going wide as she took in Hazel properly for the first time. "Hazel, you're so much bigger than in the photograph Mary sent. You must be 12 now." 13 next month. "And the others? Are they all here? Are they—" Clara's voice caught. "Are they all right?" Before Hazel could answer, the front door banged open and Eli's voice carried through the house. "Hazel, Mei Lin, there's a strange wagon in the—" He appeared in the parlor doorway and stopped dead, his eyes going from Clara to Cole to Hazel with quick assessment. "What's happening?" June appeared behind him, then Noah, and finally Lily, all of them drawn by the tension in the air. They crowded into the parlor entrance, a wall of children watching the stranger with expressions that ranged from curiosity to wariness. Clara stood slowly, her eyes moving from face to face, cataloging features and changes. "You're Eli. You look just like your father, but with Mary's eyes." And June, "Oh, you're the image of my sister at that age. And the little ones—" Her voice broke completely. "Noah was just a baby when I last saw a photograph. And Lily wasn't even born when Mary and I last corresponded." "Who is she?" Lily whispered to June, pressing close to her sister. "I'm your Aunt Clara," Clara said softly. "Your mother's sister." The silence that followed was profound. Hazel watched her siblings process this information, saw June's eyes go to the photograph still lying on the table, saw Eli's shoulders tense with defensive suspicion, saw Noah press himself against the doorframe as if preparing to run. "Why are you here?" Eli asked, his voice hard. "If you're family, where were you when Mama died? Where were you when they put us in that place? Where were you when we were being auctioned like cattle?" The accusations hit Clara like physical blows. She sat back down heavily, her face crumpling. "I was trying to get to you. I swear I was trying. But I didn't have money, didn't have connections, didn't know how to navigate the system fast enough. By the time I found out where you were, you'd already been adopted, and the county clerk said—" She pressed her hands over her face. "I failed you. I failed Mary. I know that. I'm not here to make excuses. I'm just here to see you, to know you're safe." Mei Lin moved to the children, her presence steadying. "Why don't you all go upstairs for a bit? The adults need to finish talking." "No." Hazel's voice was firm. "Whatever gets decided affects us most. We should be part of the conversation." Cole looked like he might argue, then seemed to reconsider. "All right. But you listen more than you talk, and you let the adults handle the legal aspects. Understood?" They nodded and filed into the room properly, arranging themselves on the sofa and floor with the instinctive unity they'd developed over months of facing threats together. Clara watched them settle with an expression of longing so intense it was painful to witness. "Mrs. Bennett," Cole said carefully, "I understand your situation and I sympathize with your efforts to find the children, but I need to be clear about the facts. These children were legally available for adoption because no family members came forward during the statutory waiting period. You may have been trying to reach them, but you didn't reach them in time. The adoption is final, recognized by territorial law, and cannot be overturned short of proof of fraud or abuse, neither of which exist." "I understand," Clara whispered. "Furthermore, these children have been through significant trauma. They've finally found stability and security. Disrupting that now, even with the best intentions, would be damaging." "I'm not trying to disrupt anything," Clara said, her voice gaining strength. "I know I can't undo the adoption. I know they're legally yours now. But couldn't I at least be part of their lives? Visit sometimes? Write letters? I don't want to replace anyone or cause trouble. I just want to know Mary's children. Is that too much to ask?" The question hung in the air. Hazel found herself torn between competing impulses, the fierce desire to protect the family they'd built, and the unexpected pull toward this woman who shared their blood, who'd known their mother, who represented a connection to the past they'd thought completely severed. Cole looked at Mei Lin, who looked at the children. After a moment, Mei Lin spoke. "That's not a decision the adults should make alone. These children have voices and they should be heard." She turned to them. "What do you want? Be honest." June spoke first, her voice soft but clear. "I want to hear about Mama, things we don't remember or were too young to know, stories about when she was young. Could you tell us those things?" Clara's face transformed with fragile hope. "Yes. Oh yes, I could tell you so much. Mary was brilliant and brave and so full of love even when life was hard." "I want to see the photograph," Lily announced. "The one of Mama." Clara reached for her bag with trembling hands and produced a small leather case. Inside was a portrait photograph. Mary Carter, probably taken in her late teens, with June's delicate features and Hazel's serious eyes, and a smile that suggested she'd once believed the world held good things. The children gathered around to look, even Eli, who pretended indifference but couldn't quite hide his hunger to see the mother he'd lost. Noah reached out and touched the photograph gently, as if he could reach through time and connect with the woman who'd given him life. "She's pretty," Lily said. "She looks nice." "She was," Clara whispered. "She was the best of us." Hazel looked at this aunt who'd tried and failed, who carried guilt and grief in every line of her body, who asked for so little, just connection, just the chance to know the children she'd lost. And she looked at Cole and Mei Lin, who'd given them everything when they had no obligation to do so, who'd fought for them and kept them and made them family. "I think," Hazel said slowly, "that we're lucky enough to have more family, not less. If Aunt Clara wants to visit sometimes, if she wants to write letters and tell us about Mama, that doesn't take anything away from what we have here. It just adds something we thought we'd lost. Eli looked skeptical. And if she decides she wants us back after all? If she tries to fight the adoption? I won't, Clara said immediately. I swear to you on Mary's memory, I won't try to take you from a good home. I've seen too many children in bad situations to risk moving you from a good one. I just want to know you. That's all. Cole stood and walked to the window, his back to the room, his shoulders tense. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he was trying to control. I spent years alone in this house, convinced I was better off that way, convinced that connection meant vulnerability and vulnerability meant pain. These children taught me different, taught me that family isn't about ownership or legal rights or even blood. It's about showing up. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. He turned back to face them. Clara Bennett tried to show up. She failed through no fault of her own, but she tried. And now she's here, asking not to replace us but to be included. I'd be a hypocrite to deny her that when the whole reason I have these children is because someone gave me a chance I didn't entirely deserve. Maylin moved to stand beside him, her small hand finding his. We set boundaries, she said firmly. Visits are scheduled in advance, happen here where the children feel safe, and don't interfere with school or ranch duties. Letters are welcome. But you don't make promises you can't keep, and you don't disappear and reappear randomly. Consistency is what these children need most. Clara nodded eagerly. Whatever terms you set, I'll abide by them. I'm living in Billings now, found work at a boarding house. I can visit once a month, write letters in between. I'll bring photographs of Mary, tell stories, answer questions, whatever they want to know. And if they decide they don't want contact, Cole pressed, if it's too painful or confusing, then I respect that. Their well-being comes first. Always. The adults looked at the children, waiting for final judgment. Hazel glanced at her siblings, saw June's hopeful expression, Eli's residual suspicion, Noah's careful observation, Lily's innocent curiosity. She took a breath and made the decision for all of them. We'll try it. Monthly visits, letters, in between. You tell us about Mama, and we'll tell you about our life here. But this is our home, and Cole and Maylin are our family. That doesn't change. That doesn't change, Clara agreed, her voice thick with tears. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this chance. The first visit was awkward, everyone feeling out boundaries and expectations. But Clara kept her word. She came monthly, always at scheduled times, always bearing small gifts that were thoughtful rather than extravagant. She told stories about Mary as a girl, about their childhood, about the dreams Mary had harbored before life wore them down. She brought more photographs, letters Mary had written, small family heirlooms she'd managed to save. And slowly the children began to weave her into their understanding of family, not as a replacement for Cole and Maylin, but as an addition, a bridge to a past they'd thought completely lost. June found particular comfort in Clara's presence, spending hours asking questions about their mother and recording the answers in her journals. Even Eli eventually thawed, especially when Clara shared stories about their father's good qualities alongside the bad, helping him understand that people were complicated rather than simply villains or heroes. The months rolled forward, autumn into winter, winter into spring again. The ranch marked time in seasons and growth, calves born, gardens planted, children shooting up so fast their clothes never quite fit right. Cole and Maylin formalized their own partnership, not through marriage, but through a legal arrangement that made Maylin partial owner of the ranch and ensured she'd have security regardless of what the future held. We're partners in this enterprise of raising children and running this place, Cole explained when the paperwork was completed. Might as well make it official. Maylin's expression suggested she found his pragmatic romanticism both exasperating and touching, but she signed the papers without complaint. School continued with its mixture of acceptance and exclusion. The Drayton children learned to navigate social complexity, who to trust, who to avoid, how to hold their heads high in the face of lingering prejudice. Miss Brennan remained their advocate, but she also taught them that advocating for themselves was a skill they'd need long after they left her classroom. Hazel turned 13, then 14, growing into a young woman who carried responsibility with increasing ease now that she wasn't carrying it alone. She helped Maylin with the younger children, assisted Cole with ranch accounts, and began to dream about possibilities beyond the ranch, not leaving, but expanding, maybe becoming a teacher herself someday, or a ranch manager, or one of those new businesswomen she'd read about in June's borrowed newspapers. Eli turned 12 and discovered he had a gift for working with difficult horses, the kind other ranchers had given up on. Pete and Santiago, who returned each summer for seasonal work, began actively training him, and Cole quietly started a fund to send Eli to a horse training program in Billings when he was old enough. June turned 11 and won a territorial writing contest with an essay about family and belonging that made even crusty Judge Morrison tear up when he presented her award. She began talking about going to normal school someday, becoming a teacher, maybe even a writer. Noah turned 8 and spoke in full sentences most of the time now, though he still retreated to silence when overwhelmed. He'd developed a talent for gentling animals, cats, dogs, even the wild creatures that sometimes appeared around the ranch, learned to trust his patient stillness. And Lily turned 6, started first grade, and announced her intention to become a veterinarian like Dr. Ashford because animals need doctors too, and I'm going to be the best one in all of Montana. The annual welfare checks became routine rather than terrifying. Dr. Ashford arriving, examining everyone, filing glowing reports, staying for supper because Mei Lin's cooking was legendary, and he was a widower who appreciated good food and better company. Life wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, still moments when old fears resurfaced, still times when the children reverted to survival mode because trauma didn't disappear just because circumstances improved. But those moments became less frequent, less intense, more manageable. And through it all, the Broken Pine Ranch stood solid, a place where broken things came to heal, where family was made rather than inherited, where 5 children learned that being unwanted once didn't mean being unwanted forever. 2 years after the adoption, on a crisp November evening with the first snow of the season dusting the ground, the family gathered on the front porch for the annual photograph that had become tradition. Cole had hired a traveling photographer to come to the ranch, wanting to mark each year of their life together with visual proof that they were real, they were family, they were permanent. They arranged themselves on the porch steps, Cole and Mei Lin in the back, the children arrayed in front in descending height order. But before the photographer could snap the picture, Noah spoke up. "Wait, Aunt Clara should be in it too. She's family." Clara, who'd been standing to the side thinking she was just there to observe, looked startled. "Oh, I couldn't. This is your family photograph." "Your family?" June insisted. "You're part of our story now." Clara joined them on the steps, fitting into the space they made for her, and the photographer captured them there. 8 people of different backgrounds and circumstances, brought together by loss and choice, and the daily work of caring for each other. When the photograph was developed and framed weeks later, Cole hung it in the parlor next to the one from the previous year. The visual progression was stark. In the first photograph, the children looked tentative, uncertain, like they were waiting for permission to believe in permanence. In the second, they looked settled, confident, like they knew exactly where they belonged. "We should write on the back," June suggested, "like we did in my journal. So years from now, people know what it meant." They gathered around the photograph still in its frame, and June carefully removed it to write on the backing in her neat script. The Drayton family, Broken Pine Ranch, Montana Territory, November 1876. Built from pieces the world tried to throw away, held together by choice and stubbornness and love. Proof that family isn't about who you're born to. It's about who refuses to give up on you. Cole read it over her shoulder and had to clear his throat several times before he could speak. "That's good. That's real good, June." "It's true," she said simply. "That's what makes it good." That Christmas was their second as a legal family, and Mei Lin orchestrated it with the precision of a military campaign. There were gifts, practical things mostly, but also a few frivolous items that made the children squeal with delight. There was a feast that required 2 days of preparation and left them all groaning with fullness. There was singing, though none of them could carry a tune, and laughter that echoed through the house. And there was a moment, late on Christmas night, when the children were finally asleep and the adults sat around the kitchen table nursing cups of coffee, when Cole spoke the thought that had been building in him for months. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "about expanding. Not the ranch exactly, but what we do here. There are other children in situations like the Carters were. Other kids who need a place to land, to heal, to to figure out who they're going to be. Maylin set down her cup carefully. You want to take in more children? Not instead of the ones we have. In addition to. When they're older, when we have more hands to help, when the ranch is more established. I was thinking maybe we could become an official placement home. Not an orphanage, I hate those places, but a ranch where kids could come, learn skills, be part of something bigger than survival. Clara, who'd stayed late to help clean up from the celebration, looked thoughtful. That's ambitious and needed. There are so many children falling through cracks in the system. It's years away, Cole cautioned. We've got our hands full as it is. But someday, when these 5 are more independent, when we've proven the model works, I'd like to do it. Give other kids what we gave these ones. A chance. Maylin smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed her usually serious face. Then we'll do it. Someday. When the time is right. The conversation shifted to practical matters, how much space they'd need, what kind of staffing, how to navigate the legal and bureaucratic challenges. But underneath the logistics was something deeper. The recognition that what had started as one stubborn rancher's impulsive decision to buy 5 unwanted children had transformed into something with the power to change more lives than just theirs. The years continued their march forward. The children grew and changed, navigating the complicated terrain of adolescence with varying degrees of grace. Hazel became the ranch's de facto business manager by age 16, her head for numbers and practical sense making her invaluable. Eli trained seriously with horses and began developing a reputation in the territory for his skill. June won a scholarship to normal school and began the work of becoming a teacher. Noah discovered a talent for drawing and filled sketchbooks with detailed renderings of ranch life. And Lily remained irrepressibly herself, collecting animals and dreams with equal enthusiasm. Cole aged 2, silver threading more prominently through his dark hair, lines deepening around his eyes from years of squinting at horizons and smiling at children when he thought they weren't looking. Maylin maintained her ageless quality, though she moved slightly slower in the mornings and occasionally complained about her knees. Clara became a fixture in their lives, as constant as the seasons, bringing news from the wider world and stories from the past in equal measure. She never remarried, never had children of her own, seemed content to pour her maternal energy into these nieces and nephews who'd been lost and found. And through all of it, the Broken Pine Ranch endured, weathering storms and droughts, good years and lean ones, the inevitable conflicts that came with raising strong-willed children into strong-willed adults. It endured because the people who lived there chose daily to make it endure, to work through difficulties rather than run from them, to believe that what they'd built together was worth the effort of maintenance and care. On a summer evening when Hazel was 17, she stood on the porch where she'd stood so many times before and looked out over the ranch she'd come to love. Behind her in the house, her siblings were arguing about something trivial. Lily wanted to adopt another stray cat. June thought 5 cats was already excessive. Eli was taking Lily's side just to be contrary, and Noah was sketching the argument with amused detachment. Cole emerged from the barn and walked toward the house, his stride still strong despite the years. He joined Hazel on the porch, standing in comfortable silence as they watched the sun paint the western sky in shades of orange and gold. "You thinking about leaving?" he asked quietly. The question surprised her. "No, why would you think that?" "You're 17, old enough to make your own way, smart enough to do well wherever you go. Thought you might be getting restless." Hazel considered this. "I think about the future sometimes, about what I want to do, who I want to be, but I don't think about it in terms of leaving, more in terms of growing." Cole nodded, understanding in the gesture. "That's good. That's healthy. You should have dreams that go beyond this ranch." "My dreams include this ranch," Hazel corrected. "They just also include other things. Maybe business school someday. Maybe helping you turn this place into that placement home you talked about. Maybe both." She glanced at him. "You taught us that family doesn't mean staying in one place forever. It means knowing you have a place to come back to." Cole's throat worked with emotion he still struggled to express even after all these years. "I did all right then, with you kids, despite having no idea what I was doing. You did better than all right, Dad. You did something most people don't manage. You built a family out of intention instead of accident. You chose us every day, even when we were difficult or scared or broken. That's not nothing. You weren't broken, Cole said firmly. You were bent. There's a difference. Bent things can straighten out with the right support. Broken things can't be fixed. Then we were bent, Hazel agreed, and you and Mei Lin provided the support that let us straighten. Same result, different metaphor. Cole huffed something that might have been laughter. Too smart for your own good, just like Mei Lin always says. Inside, the argument had devolved into laughter, and through the window, Hazel could see Mei Lin orchestrating some kind of compromise that would probably involve very specific rules about cat management. The scene was so perfectly ordinary, so beautifully mundane, that Hazel felt her chest tighten with gratitude for the sheer everyday miracle of it. I never thanked you properly, she said softly. For the auction platform. For paying too much. For bringing all 5 of us home when any sane person would have taken one at most. I've been thanked plenty, Cole said. Every time one of you kids calls me Dad. Every time I watch you grow into who you're meant to be instead of who circumstances tried to make you. That's thanks enough. They stood together in the gathering dusk, father and daughter by choice rather than blood, watching the last light fade from the Montana sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new growth, new moments of joy and difficulty. But tonight, they had this: the solid certainty of home, the warm knowledge of family, the hard-won peace that came from surviving storms together and building something that would last. Inside, Mei Lin called them for supper, and they went in together to join the people who'd become their family through the daily accumulation of small choices and fierce commitment. The table was set for 8 now, 7 permanent residents plus Clara, who'd stayed for the week. And the conversation flowed with the easy rhythm of people who knew each other's stories, who'd seen each other at worst and best, and had chosen to stay anyway. This was the real victory, Hazel thought, as she passed bread and poured milk and listened to Lily's elaborate plan for cat training. Not the courtroom triumph or the legal papers or the annual welfare checks that confirmed their thriving. The real victory was this: 5 children who'd been told they were too much, too expensive, too broken, sitting around a table in a house that was theirs, with adults who'd chosen them on purpose, building a future that was theirs to shape. The real victory was learning that being unwanted once didn't define you forever, that family could be made as well as born, that home was something you built through the daily work of showing up and choosing each other even when it was hard. The real victory was the 5 Carter children who'd become Drayton, or Carter Drayton, or some combination thereof, who'd learned they were worth fighting for, who carried that knowledge forward into lives that would eventually take them beyond this ranch, but never away from the family they'd found here. Years later, when this ranch did become that placement home Cole had dreamed of, when other bent children came through those doors to find the same patient support and fierce protection the original 5 had received, Hazel would tell them the story of the auction platform. She'd tell them about 5 siblings who refused to be separated, about a stubborn rancher who paid too much for children nobody else wanted, about a housekeeper who turned a house into a home, about a town that tried to tear them apart, and a judge who let them stay together. She'd tell them that story not as history, but as promise. Proof that broken things could heal, that families could be chosen, that being unwanted once didn't mean being unwanted forever. But tonight, in this moment, with her family gathered around the table and the Montana darkness settling soft around the ranch, Hazel didn't think about those future children or that future story. She just ate supper and laughed at Eli's terrible jokes and helped Lily with her arithmetic and felt, bone deep, the simple extraordinary gift of belonging. They'd come a long way from that November platform. 5 scared children clinging to each other against the cold wind of uncertainty. They'd become 5 young people building lives and dreams, held steady by the family they'd made and the home they'd claimed as their own. And that, Hazel thought as she met Cole's eyes across the table and saw her own contentment reflected there, was more than enough. It was everything. The Broken Pine Ranch stood solid against the Montana night, its windows warm with lamplight, its walls sheltering the family within, built from pieces the world had tried to discard, held together by daily choice and stubborn love, proof that sometimes the best families were the ones you built yourself. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the distant peaks and painted the ranch in shades of gold, They'd wake and begin again. The daily work of being family, of choosing each other, of building something that would last not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Home. Finally, permanently, unshakably home.